Chapter 521. When Xueqi came here to find the tribesmen, people from other tribes were watching this place. The place where they were settled was not far away, so if there was any movement, the others would know. When Xueqi came here, people from other tribes naturally saw him too. Seeing Xueqi suddenly turn and walk in that direction, people's eyes suddenly became meaningful. The Eight Limbs tribe was so scheming. Young people at this age definitely had little resistance to beautiful girls. The Grand Elder of the Flaming Horn tribe would not be spared either. In that direction was the house where the Eight Limbs tribe was settled. Outside the house, Sue of the Eight Limbs tribe was sitting on a white-haired spider, combing the spider's hair with a fishbone comb in her hand. Sue was one of the more powerful people in the Eight Limbs tribe. Not to mention the Eight Limbs tribe, there were also many young people from other tribes who were pursuing her. Xueqi, who led the team from the Eight Limbs tribe this time, was also happy to see this situation. He thought to himself, good, if that guy is interested in Sue, maybe we can learn more about Yanjiao's secrets through him. How could he have overlooked this? Seeing Xueqi come over, Sue's hand movements paused, her fingers holding the fishbone comb tightened, and her lowered eyes slowly looked up. Before she could say anything, Xueqi ran past her like a gust of wind. Sue! She carelessly combed a large tuft of white hair from the spider's body. The people who had been watching the situation here were also confused. What happened to the head elder of Yanjiao tribe? Xueqi didn't pay attention to what others were thinking at all. He just locked on the two breaths. Different from the breaths he encountered a few days ago, these two people should be the ones who had sneaked into the tribe and buried the longevity leaf. It was rare to find these two people, so Xueqi definitely wouldn't let go of this opportunity. Maybe they felt Xueqi's approach. The two people planned to run away quickly. Want to escape? Xueqi's knees slightly bent, like a taut bowstring trembling slightly. He sped up again and ran away with a whoosh, leaving only a faint shadow for the people behind. The people of the 7 tribes looked at Xueqi's sudden crazy behavior in confusion. What's wrong with him? Someone asked. Who knows? Maybe he's in a hurry to eat meat. I heard that Yanjiao people love meat. They love meat, but they don't lack it. Anyway, Yanjiao is a big tribe now. Even if they are in a hurry to eat meat, they shouldn't be in such a hurry. Who knows, after all, Yanjiao's was rude and rude and rude. They had never been able to tear their image's names' impression. From the Yanjiao people. S says to follow him. S. Someone sighed with emotions, S. They were just discussing whether they could follow a person with a slightly higher status in the Flaming Horns tribe. Maybe they could find out some secrets. But after seeing the scene in front of them, they were deeply suspicious. Although they didn't understand why Xueqi was doing this, they couldn't help but be curious. Xueqi was running in the direction of the Yanjiao tribe, and it looked more like he was chasing after someone. The people who had been hiding in their houses to discuss countermeasures all ran out. Because this was still Yanjiao territory, they couldn't move freely. They could only jump onto the roof to see further. There's someone running in front. Someone on the roof exclaimed. In front of Xueqi, there were 2 figures running so fast that they couldn't see their faces clearly. It seemed that Xueqi's target was those 2. Yanjiao's patrol team is following him. Something must have happened. Besides us, who else has snuck in? Without much hesitation, the Feather, Tianshan, and Hui tribesmen hurriedly called out to their own tribe's birds. Of course, the roof couldn't be compared to the sky. Moreover, they couldn't run around on land, so how could the Yanjiao control them in the air? Yanjiao only had 1 bird now, and the more threatening eagle was long gone. They had nothing to fear now. Let me up. Someone from the Longboat tribe ran towards the Feather tribe, but was kicked away by the Feather tribesmen. Get lost. Go find the Tianshan and Hui tribes. Their eagles are bigger. The Feather tribe's birds were mostly small, so they could only carry a limited number of people. In terms of air power, the 2 tribes on the grasslands had the advantage. Unfortunately, they wouldn't let anyone from other tribes stand on their backs. Several birds took off almost at the same time, chasing after Xueqi. When Xueqi chased after the 2 figures, the Yanjiao patrol team naturally noticed something was wrong. Moreover, the 2 people who snuck and hid well and were far away from the Yanjiao warriors, so the patrol team didn't notice them. But once they started running, their totemic power soared, and the fire seed's aura became stronger. They obviously weren't from their own tribe, nor were they from the 7 tribes that came today. They must be the targets they were guarding against these days. Chase. The patrol team held their breath and ran after them. However, not everyone had Xiao Xian's speed. The patrol team had only just reached the edge of the tribe, but they were already far behind the 3 people in front of them, and the distance was still increasing. Even if they were left far behind, they had to keep following. Maybe they could help when the time came. Moreover, the tribe rewarded rewards based on merit. How could they give up such a good opportunity to earn merit? In the patrol team, a few Yanjiao warriors who weren't good at speed stopped. They couldn't keep up with the rest of the team, and if they stayed, they would only be a burden. They could only turn around to inform the leaders of the tribe, and at the same time, guard against other people who might have snuck in. On the ground, Xiao Xian locked onto the 2 people and kept chasing after them. His legs were so fast that they couldn't be seen. His whole body left a faint, fleeting shadow on the grassland. Run. You can run once, but I won't let you run a second time. If I don't catch you today, I'm not the great elder. Xiao Xian sped up again, and the air whizzed past, leaving a whistling sound. His 2 arms kept swinging and cutting the air, making whooshing sounds. At this time, Xiao Xian was like a speeding train, whizzing past on the ground. The patrol team behind could no longer see their great elder's figure. They could only vaguely judge the direction from the fire seed's aura. Keep chasing. The leader of the patrol team gritted his teeth and said. They had already chased so far away from the tribe, it wasn't good to turn back. The people of the Feather Tribe, Tian Shan Tribe, and Hui Tribe in the air were also dumbfounded. They knew that Xiao Xian ran fast, but they didn't expect him to be this fast. They almost couldn't keep up. Not to mention the Yanjiao patrol team and the people in the air. Even the 2 people running at the front were very surprised, and their mouths were bitter. How did this kid catch up to them? He didn't chase this fast before. No, that kid didn't have this kind of speed before. The people in the air, as well as the Yanjiao patrol team, were all ignored by these 2 people. The only thing they were afraid of was Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian's pursuit exceeded their expectations, and they had no choice but to take measures. Fortunately, Xiao Xian was only one person, and there were 2 of them. Needless to say, the 2 suddenly split up and ran in 2 different directions. As long as Xiao Xian paused and hesitated for a second or 2, they would be able to leave Xiao Xian further behind. That would be half the battle won. However, they didn't expect that Xiao Xian didn't stop at all. He didn't even slow down. He continued to chase after one of the figures and didn't care about the other one. Damn it! Why didn't that kid even stop? The person being stared at by Xiao Xian cursed in his heart. Unfortunately, this wasn't the time to be distracted. After chasing for so long, that kid showed no signs of slowing down. They didn't have the advantage in speed, and they might not win in terms of physical strength. They had to use other methods. The person running at the front quickly observed the terrain. They were already quite a distance away from the Yanjiao tribe, and far away from the territory once occupied by Wanshe. There were more trees around, and further ahead, there was a dense forest. Good. The person running at the front was secretly happy. He was also very good at hiding in the forest. Let's see if that kid can still find us after we hide in the forest. Xiao Xian also thought to himself, you think I can't find you if you hide in the forest? Chapter 522. Although the forest ahead was quite dense, it was still very different from the fearsome beast forest. There were many trees in the forest, but they weren't very big. There were very few ancient trees that were hundreds of years old. This place was deserted, but it didn't mean that no one came here. Sometimes, some teams that were on a trade trip would enter this forest. There were no fearsome beasts, only some small animals that were active. After the person in front rushed into the forest, he began to quickly look for the best hiding spot. His running route was also strange and varied, twisting and turning in the forest. His line of sight was blocked by the leaves, so he couldn't see the person in front. Xiao Xian could only hear the rustling of leaves and branches. Seeing the other person's movements in the forest, Xiao Xian knew that he was an experienced person who knew how to run quickly in the forest with the least noise. Some of the sounds in front might not have been accidentally made by the other person. It was very likely that they had deliberately made it. He couldn't judge by the sound alone. Those were all interference methods used by the other person. Xiao Xian kept a close eye on the other person's fire seed. However, as he chased, the other person's fire seed suddenly disappeared. Strange. Xiao Xian slowed down his footsteps, then slowly moved forward. There were a few small animals hugging branches in the surrounding trees, looking curiously at Xueqi. They made a threatening sound, but Xueqi ignored it. There was a slope in front of him. Because of the dense weeds, Xueqi couldn't see the situation below the slope. He could only judge from the sound of running water that there was a small river below. In the middle of the slope, there was an animal skin coat that the other person had worn. Further down the slope, there were also the pants and shoes that the target had worn. Xueqi didn't go down to check. Instead, he stood at the top of the slope and looked around. There were a few thicker trees around. Perhaps because there weren't many people here, the trees were older than the trees in other places. The shrubbery wasn't very tall, so Xueqi could see the general situation of the surrounding ground. After scanning the bushes, Xueqi walked around the surrounding ancient trees. From time to time, he would look at the branches on the trees. Occasionally, he would stop and listen to the surrounding sounds to see if anyone was approaching. For a moment, the only sound that could be heard was Xueqi's footsteps on the ground and the rustling of branches. Not far away, a few birds were chirping, which made this place seem even more desolate. Xueqi walked back and forth a few times to check the surroundings before leaving. After Xueqi left, the surroundings became quiet again, with only the faint chirping of birds and insects. After a while, there was a slight movement on the tree near the slope, as if someone was gently scraping the bark of the tree. About 20 meters above the ground, at the intersection of two branches on the tree trunk, a pair of eyes suddenly opened, and the eyeballs even moved a bit. At first glance, one would think that the eyes grew on the tree. However, upon closer inspection, one would realize that the eyes weren't embedded in the tree, but belonged to someone else. The texture and wrinkles on the tree bark gradually receded, revealing human skin. With the sound of light breathing, a humanoid figure was revealed. This person was the target that Xueqi had been chasing. After looking around, the person nimbly slid down the tree and prepared to leave. However, after taking 2 steps, his scalp suddenly tightened. His sharp intuition told him that there was danger here. His eyelids twitched, and he suddenly had a bad feeling. Run! He stepped out and prepared to start his second round of running. However, before he could start running, his leg seemed to touch something. With a buzzing sound, the branches on the surrounding trees seemed to be suddenly cut off. The broken branches and leaves flew up, and the easily overlooked thin threads gathered in his direction. His leg was tightly bound. His ankle had been tied twice, and it was very tight, as if it was going to break his entire leg. He could feel that if he tried to break free, his leg might be crippled. He wanted to take out a knife to cut the thread, but he didn't have the time. Just as he was about to take out his knife, a few more threads tightened around his leg, and his entire leg was bound. Not far away, footsteps could be heard approaching at a steady pace. Hearing the footsteps, the person who was bound by the noose bowed his head, resigned to his fate. How did he fall for it? This kid is really cunning. Well, I won't run. The person raised his hand and looked at Xueqi, who was walking in front of him, and forced a smile. Xueqi returned a smile. His wrist moved, and the blade of his sword was next to the person's neck. If he moved a little more, he could cut the person's pulse. The coldness and murderous intent of the metal blade made the person tremble. Don't kill me. I really don't mean any harm. I'm just curious. I heard that you destroyed the Wanshi tribe, so I went to Yanjiao to have a look. Xueqi didn't talk nonsense with him. His sword didn't move at all, and he said, "Come out." The person raised his eyebrows slightly, but didn't speak. The surrounding forest was very quiet. There were no human voices, only the sounds of insects and birds in the forest. You don't want to come out? Then I'll collect his corpse. Xueqi was about to cut down. Wait! A woman's voice of unknown age came from behind the bushes. She looked very young, but gave Xueqi a sense of weather-beaten maturity. Her face was very ordinary, the kind that was easy to forget. She was dressed like a Yanjiao tribesman. The patterns on her animal skin clothes were all Yanjiao-style flame patterns, and the bone ornaments she wore were similar to those of the Yanjiao tribesmen. If you only looked at her appearance, she wouldn't stand out at all among the Yanjiao tribesmen. No wonder this person could sneak into the territory of the Yanjiao tribe. If there's something we can talk about, there's no need to kill. The woman was still calm. You haven't killed him yet, so I guess you want to learn more from us. That's right. Xueqi withdrew his sword, but he didn't retract the worm silk that bound the person. The woman glanced at the person who was tied up and saw him shake his head. She knew that the thread that bound him wasn't ordinary and couldn't be easily broken. She had to think of another way. Xueqi pretended that he didn't see the exchange of glances between the two. He asked, "Who are you? Why did you come to the Yanjiao tribe? Don't tell me you sneaked in because you were curious. I don't believe that. If you continue to talk nonsense, I'll break your leg." Although Xueqi's tone was calm, the two of them knew that he wasn't joking. The sword that was placed on the person's neck just now was very real. If the woman didn't come out, the sword would have cut him down. Knowing that it wasn't easy to fool him, the person who was tied up thought for a while and said, "Robber 11. Robber 12. The woman who walked over said unwillingly. Seeing Xueqi frown and stare at them, Robber 11 said helplessly, "It's true, I'm not lying. I'm sure you've guessed that we're from the robber tribe. We're named according to our ranking." This was half true and half false. They were indeed named according to their ranking, but it was just a code name. They wouldn't say their real names so easily. Even the inner circle of the robber tribe didn't know what everyone was called. However, they wouldn't tell Xueqi about this. Xueqi didn't say anything. He just stared at the two of them and sized them up. The two of them felt a chill down their spines. Xueqi didn't suspect the origins of these two people. Although he looked calm on the surface, he was very surprised in his heart. He discovered something strange. In the past, he only felt that the fire seed of the robber tribe was special. Now, it seemed that the feeling wasn't wrong. The robber tribe was indeed different from the other tribes. Xueqi already knew that the robber tribe was a very special one. The members of this tribe were relatively independent and didn't live together like the other tribes. The mystery of this tribe was that until now, no one had been able to find out where this tribe was located. Many people hated them to the core and spent a lot of effort to find them. There were even many people who lost their precious items and shouted that they wanted to destroy the fire seed of the robber tribe so that the robber tribe had nowhere to steal. However, no one had ever succeeded. Of course, they couldn't succeed because the original fire seed of the robber tribe was probably long gone. Xueqi had always thought that Yanjiao was the first tribe to merge their fire seed. But now, it seemed that this wasn't the case. No wonder when he asked about the robber tribe in the past, everyone said that they were very mysterious. Their members were scattered and hard to understand. It was because they merged their fire seed that they didn't need to gather around the original fire seed. Their tribe structure had changed a long time ago. They went from gathering to being scattered, more like an organization. They did their own things on normal days and gathered together when something happened. It was no wonder that no one could find the main camp of the robber tribe. They didn't even have the original fire seed. Even if there was a fire pit, it was useless. "What did you steal in Yanjiao?" Xueqi asked. "Nothing. We didn't even do anything and we were already discovered." Robber 11 shook his head. What he said was true. They were also depressed. How did they get discovered so quickly? Other than you two, who else snuck into Yanjiao? Xueqi asked again. "I don't know." Robber 11 said, "We don't know what the others were doing. They were all doing their own things." "You really don't know?" "He went to the house where you buried the thing," Xueqi said. Robber 11 and Robber 12's expressions changed. How did Xueqi know that they buried the thing? Could it be that the thing had already been dug out by the people from Yanjiao? It was Robber 7. The two didn't intend to hide it. They didn't think there was anything to hide. They only told Robber 7 where they buried the thing. If someone went there, it was most likely Robber 7. 7. Xueqi looked up at the two in front of him. He was ranked in front of these two, which meant that his level was higher than theirs. No wonder he ran away so quickly. His reaction was faster than these two. "Where did you steal the thing you buried?" Xueqi asked. The two didn't say anything. They exchanged glances many times, probably thinking about how to deceive him. "If you answer honestly, I can let you go." "Really?" The two looked straight at Xueqi, trying to discern the truth from Xueqi's eyes. "Really?" Chapter 523. In the forest, Xueqi followed the footsteps of the two in front of him. According to Robber 11 and Robber 12, the treasure was found in an underground cave not far from the Yanjiao tribe. At that time, The two of them started from the drumming tribe and followed the Yanjiao team to the old haunt. They planned to get something from the Yanjiao team. Because they stole the Water Moon King stone from the Yanjiao tribe and other tribes, they had a lot of loot that affected their movements. They wanted to hide the loot first before continuing to follow the Yanjiao team. Just like before, they would find an inconspicuous place to hide the loot. When they were done, they would go back to dig up the loot and escape with it. It was at that time that they found an underground cave. Many tribes would find a place to dig underground caves. Some did it to hide food, some did it to prevent danger and build a place to hide. The place where the cave was located was probably where a small tribe used to live. But after the tribe moved or was destroyed, the cave was left behind. The cave was well hidden and uninhabited. It was surrounded by dense trees and bushes. If they didn't deliberately dig around to hide the treasure, they might not have found the cave. Now that Xiao wanted to know the location and promised to let them go as long as they led the way, Robber 11 and Robber 12 agreed. Robber 11 and Robber 12 had never been caught before. Even if they were discovered, they could escape quickly and hard to catch up with. This was their first time being caught. They could either be killed or lead the way. They could only choose the latter. The two of them were husband and wife. If one was caught, the other wouldn't think of running away. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Robber 12 wouldn't leave alone. She also didn't dare to act recklessly. The other end of the string tied to Robber 11's leg was in Xiaoxian's hands. She didn't have the confidence to kill Xiaoxian before Xiaoxian made his move. She could only wait for an opportunity. We're almost there. I remember it's around here, Robber 11 said as he moved his ankle. If he didn't use a knife to cut them, he wouldn't have been able to break free from those threads. The more he struggled, the tighter they became. Now, his entire leg was numb. If one of his legs was crippled, he wouldn't be able to keep his title as Robber 11. He couldn't accept the fact that he couldn't get into the top 10 and fell to 11th place. Only by squeezing into the top 10 could they learn more secrets and obtain more attractive things. Their status in the tribe would also be greatly improved. He didn't want to risk losing a leg, so he was willing to compromise. He only hoped that Xiaoxian would really let him go. Robber 11 recalled the first time he met this kid. Back then, this kid wasn't that strong. Getting rid of him was child's play. How could there be such a huge change in just 2 years? Yes. Xiaoxian memorized the surrounding terrain. Next time, if no one led the way, he could come here himself. He could even fill in the gaps on the incomplete map. Yanjiao's patrol team had received the message from Xiaoxian and turned back. As for the people from the Feather Tribe, Tianshan Tribe and Hui Tribe, they lost track of Xiaoxian and Robber 11 and Robber 12 after they entered the forest. Xiaoxian wasn't interested in knowing where they went, whether they continued to search or returned to Yanjiao. Now, no one was following them. Logically speaking, Robber 11 and Robber 12 should be happy that no one was following them. 2 against 1, they should have the advantage. However, they didn't feel that way. Instead, they became more cautious. Xiaoxian dared to follow them alone. Either he was too arrogant and stupid, or he wasn't afraid of them playing tricks on him. For the sake of his leg, Robber 11 decided to be honest. He had to think carefully about his escape plan. This kid didn't seem like someone who would fool around. It's over there. Robber 11 pointed to Xiaoxian. At the same time, he paid attention to Xiaoxian's expression to see if Xiaoxian had any killing intent towards them. Xiaoxian looked over and saw that the area between the two hills was just an ordinary grassland. The ground was overgrown with weeds. Robber 12 noticed Robber 11's gaze. She hesitated for a moment before walking over and taking out a knife. Both of them had a habit of leaving a mark where they hid something that no one else could see. It was a mark that only the two of them could understand. Hence, after Robber 12 went over, he quickly found the right place to stab. She removed the layer of soil on top, revealing a square stone slab that was about a meter long. The stone slab was thick, so Robber 12 had a hard time prying it open. Although they ran fast, they weren't strong enough. Robber 11 wanted to go over and help, but Xiaoxian walked over and reached out his hand that wasn't holding the silk thread. He grabbed the thick stone slab and lifted it up along with the layer of soil that was still covering it. Seeing Xiaoxian lift the thick slab of stone as easily as peeling off tree bark with one hand, the two of them were impressed by the strength of the Flaming Horn tribesman. It's down there. Robber 12 and Robber 11 looked at each other. They jumped down first and led the way. The cave below was relatively deep, but it wasn't very long. The storage area was only about 70 to 80 square meters. However, it was very sturdy. It was supported by stone pillars and stone slabs. Otherwise, it wouldn't have lasted for so long. That was why Xueqi had a clear view of the cave after just a few steps. Robber 12 took out a water moonstone and lit up the cave. She pointed at the 3 skeletons leaning against the wall. We found the thing on them. They didn't mention the words longevity leaf to Xueqi. They thought that Xueqi might not know what it was. He just referred to it as thing and treasure. Now that they thought about it, they regretted it. Why did they bury it in Yanjiao? They should have left it here. If not, they might have been able to squeeze into the top 10 of the robbers list with the longevity leaf. Would those vulgar people in Yanjiao know the true value of the longevity leaf? It was best if they didn't know. If they had the chance, they would sneak into Yanjiao and steal it back. Unfortunately, they couldn't find out Xueqi's intentions. They also didn't know what Xueqi was thinking. Xueqi approached the skeletons. Their clothes were no longer recognizable, and there were no distinctive items on them to prove their identity. However, from the hardness of their bones and the degree of preservation, these people must have been powerful warriors. The stronger they were, the better their bones were preserved. Xueqi still remembered the wooden cylinder that held the longevity leaf. After so many years, the color of the cylinder had changed. However, to be able to preserve it for hundreds or even thousands of years without rotting, it was still a rare high-quality wood. The longevity leaf inside was even better. When he took it out, it was as fresh as new. The longevity leaf recorded the knot divination of the E tribe. It was made a long time ago by the people of the E tribe. It was similar to what Xueqi learned from the E family in the royal city. For it to appear on this side of the sea, it must have been brought here by the people who came through the sea passage 1,000 years ago. Looking at the posture of the skeletons, Xueqi asked Robber 11 and Robber 12, "When you came here, did you move them?" The two who were communicating with their eyes were startled by Xueqi's sudden question. "No. We flipped them up and looked at them, but we restored them later." They were thieves, but they were still respectful towards these corpses that had been preserved for so many years. They wouldn't break the bones and throw them away. Xueqi looked at the posture of the 3 skeletons. They were all facing the same direction as if they were looking at something. Following the empty eye sockets, Xueqi found the answer on a stone pillar. There were many words and patterns engraved on the stone pillars. Some of them might have been left behind by the small unknown tribe that first lived here, and some of them were written in the language of this place. One of the pictures seemed to be mixed with other words and pictures. Those who didn't know wouldn't be able to tell. This was also why Robber 11 and Robber 12 didn't pay attention to it. Different tribes had different styles of pictures. Robber 11 and Robber 12 didn't pay much attention to this small tribe that didn't even make a splash in history. That was why they didn't pay much attention to most of the words and pictures on the pillar. The carvings on the stone pillar looked like some kind of plant. However, Xueqi was already very surprised when he saw the carvings. This was the Ji family's family tattoo in the royal city on the other side of the sea. It was the Ji tribe's totem tattoo in the early years. Back then, when the passage under the sea rose, a group of people came from the other side of the sea. Other than the Mu and Yi family, there were also people from the Ji family. However, now that the Mu family changed their surname to Xue and dominated the desert, the Ji family died here. The people who came here had a lot of internal conflicts. What were the 3 Ji family members trying to do by stealing things from the Yi family? Unfortunately, 1,000 years had passed and Xueqi didn't know what they were thinking. Xueqi looked carefully again but didn't find anything. Other than the Ji family tattoo, there was nothing else on the pillar. The Ji family tattoo seemed to be the last trace left behind by the 3 of them. Walking out of the cave, Xueqi didn't reply to Robber 11's probing. He just let them go as promised. Once they were free, Robber 11 and Robber 12 didn't bother to probe Xueqi anymore. They just wanted to escape. Looking at the 2 escaping figures, Xueqi turned around and walked back to the cave. The Ji family had a habit. They would put grains in their graves. Judging from the looks of the 3 people in the cave, they should be prepared to die. If so, did they follow the customs of their tribe? Looking at the tribal tattoo they left behind, they should still have deep feelings for the Ji family. Xueqi had already carefully checked the cave below, but he didn't find any grains. Perhaps they had already rotted into dust, or perhaps they were eaten by other underground creatures. However, Xueqi had a feeling that this wasn't the end. If they followed the customs of the G family, they should have placed a container for grains. It didn't have to be pottery, it could have been something else. But in reality, there was nothing. If they knew they were going to die and never return, what would they do if they had grains in their hands? Chapter 524. If it wasn't hidden in the underground cave, could it have been scattered on the ground? With the intention of probing, Xueqi walked around the cave and found a few plants that looked like grains. However, they didn't look like something the Ji family would leave behind because most of them belonged to the land here. Xueqi had seen similar plants in various places before. He heard that in the early years, there were tribes that planted them. However, as time went by, people gradually forgot about them due to the discovery of a higher yield type of grain. The reason he could see these grains that were popular thousands of years ago was because a small tribe used to live here. Moreover, the underground cave was left behind by that unknown tribe. The underground cave was used as a granary to store grains, so there would be some scattered on the ground. However, these weren't something the Ji family would care about. Even thousands of years ago, they wouldn't have brought these grains with them. If the Ji family carried them around, they must have thought that they were more precious. After looking around again, Xueqi still couldn't find anything. Could it be that the 3 Ji family members really didn't bring any seeds? Or perhaps, the seeds they brought had all rotted into dust? Or could it be that someone had already come here and dug everything away? No, that shouldn't be the case. Robber 11 and Robber 12 had only been here for 2 to 3 years. If someone came here earlier, they would have found the underground cave and the longevity leaf wouldn't have been taken away by Robber 11 and Robber 12. Was he wrong? Xueqi stood at the entrance of the cave and looked around. There were a lot of weeds and all sorts of unknown plants. There weren't many trees, only a few saplings that weren't growing well and a few scattered shrubs. Hence, the place seemed more spacious. There were indeed fewer trees in this place. The weeds looked lush, but that was only because there were many of them. When they were gathered together, they looked especially lush. However, when they were separated, each one of them didn't look as good. He thought about the environment where the 1,000-grain gold grew. When they grew, they would steal all the nutrients from the surrounding soil. It was extremely overbearing. Although it wasn't as obvious here, there was a similar trend. There must be something here. Xueqi scanned his surroundings again, but this time, he didn't look for grain-like plants. Instead, he looked at all the plants that grew on the ground. Then, his gaze stopped on a plant that didn't even reach his knees. Earlier, Xueqi had been looking for grains and hadn't noticed these plants. Now that he looked at them again, he felt that they were familiar. Xueqi often ran around in the forest, so he would find the plants in the forest familiar. However, this time, it was not the plants he had seen in the forest. After thinking about it carefully, Xueqi felt that this was very similar to a plant he had seen in Jiju's field. At that time, Xueqi had gone to look for Jiju. Jiju had brought him around the golden grain fields, and he had seen many of the plants that were commonly grown there. There were crops for daily consumption and some more special plants. Among them, there was a plant that Jiju called veins of the sky. In the golden grain fields, there was a large plot of land specially set aside to grow it. Usually, there were people guarding it. The slaves were not allowed to go there at all and the stewards had to take care of it personally. However, Jiju didn't say much at that time and left with Xueqi. The golden grain fields were famous for their grains. Jiju had mainly introduced Xueqi to grains, so they had only walked past the place where veins of the sky were planted. Xueqi didn't have a deep impression of it. If he hadn't seen this plant here, he wouldn't have remembered what veins of the sky looked like. The plant not far away looked very similar to the veins of the sky, planted in Jiju's field. However, in comparison, the ones planted in Jiju's field had more leaves and grew better. The ones here were very shriveled. If one didn't look closely, they wouldn't be able to associate it with the dense foliage of the plants. This was one of the reasons why Xueqi didn't notice it at first. As for the veins of the sky, Xueqi had only seen its surface part and had never seen its underground part. The only thing he knew was that the most precious part of the veins of the sky was all underground. Moreover, the veins of the sky looked very similar to the distribution of the meridians in the human body. They were born this way, so they were named veins of the sky. Was it really veins of the sky? Were these brought here by the 3G family members? After discovering one, Xueqi looked around. He saw a few more, but they weren't big and didn't grow as well as the ones in the golden grain fields. Xueqi stabbed his sword into the ground and took out a dagger. He planned to dig one up first. After taking 2 steps, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. Xueqi tilted his head and looked at a bush about 10 meters away from him. He had always thought that it was just an ordinary bush growing here, but now he felt that something was wrong. He turned around and walked towards the shrub. When he got closer, he realized that it wasn't a shrub, but a plant with many branches. The leaves on the branches weren't very big, but when compared to the vein of the heavens, he realized that the leaves on the branches were exactly the same. The only difference was that the stem of the veins of the sky wasn't made of wood. The one Xueqi saw in the golden grain fields wasn't made of wood either, but this one was. This veins of the sky could be said to be the best growing plant in this area. Although it was only half the height of a person, it was the largest of all the other veins of the heavens in the area. If the veins of the sky weren't herbs that only grew for a few years but could turn into wood and grow endlessly, then could this biggest veins of the sky have been left behind by the G family? But after 1,000 years, this was the only change the veins of the sky had? No matter what, this was still a huge discovery. Xueqi was excited. Although he was anxious to see how the biggest veins of the sky grew, he didn't touch it directly. He didn't know what the underground part of the veins of the sky was like. If he wasn't careful, he might accidentally destroy a treasure. So, Xueqi walked back, took the dagger, and carefully dug out the small one he had found earlier. Bit by bit, the soil was removed. This plant that didn't even reach Xueqi's knee revealed its roots. There were many roots. If not for the different stems and leaves, Xueqi would have thought he was digging up ginseng. However, this root was even finer and more numerous than ginseng. Xueqi was even more careful, trying his best to dig out this veins of the sky. The more he dug, the more shocked he became. When he saw the complete veins of the sky, Xueqi felt a chill run down his spine. It was too similar. It was too similar. When Xueqi first heard about the veins of the sky from Jiju, he only knew that the most useful underground part of the veins of the sky looked very similar to a human's meridians. Now that he saw it for himself, he knew how similar it was. The roots he dug out were no more than the length of a palm. Each of the thin roots seemed to correspond to a meridian in the human body. Which part was thick, which part was thin, which part was long, which part was short, which part was forked. More than 90% of them corresponded. The veins of the sky lived up to its name. Xueqi didn't know what the veins of the sky were used for. Jiju didn't mention it at the time, only telling Xueqi that it was a plant used for medicinal purposes. However, looking at it, it should be related to meridians, right? After digging out one, Xueqi looked around again. Now that he was looking for the veins of the sky instead of staring at the grains, he realized that there were quite a few veins of the sky growing in this area. Xueqi just looked around 50 meters and saw more than 20. However, those were not big and didn't grow very well. Perhaps the biggest one had stolen all the nutrients. Xueqi planned to dig these up and bring them back to take a look. It would be even better if they could be transplanted. Since Jiju was willing to open up such a large piece of land in the field just to plant the veins of the sky, and even guarded it with so many soldiers, it must be something extraordinary. After chasing Robber 11 and Robber 12 for so long and spending so much time running here, Xueqi didn't plan to return to the tribe tonight. He decided to stay here and guard it first. He went to the forest to hunt a wild boar and found some fruits for dinner. During the hunt, Xueqi saw a flying squirrel being hunted. This kind of thing happened all the time in the forest and could be seen everywhere. If it was in the past, Xueqi wouldn't even look at it. However, today, Xueqi stepped in and saved the injured flying squirrel that was about to be swallowed. It wasn't that Xueqi suddenly decided to be kind. He thought of the veins of the sky and wanted to use this flying squirrel to test its use. The flying squirrel that was tied up by Xueqi screamed in fear and struggled with all its might. However, it couldn't break free from the rope no matter how hard it tried. He waited for Xueqi to finish off the wild boar and fill his stomach before bringing the flying squirrel over. He didn't bring it too close. This little thing's claws were sharp and it could bite. Xueqi held the flying squirrel in one hand and the veins of the sky that he dug up today with the other hand. He moved the roots towards the flying squirrel. When the roots of veins of the sky reached the flying squirrel tried to avoid them. Xueqi continued moving the roots of veins of the sky closer to the flying squirrel's mouth. The flying squirrel was forced into a corner and bit down. Then it froze. However, It only froze for a second. Soon, the flying squirrel crazily gnawed at the roots of veins of the sky. It was as fast as a chef cutting vegetables. Only a series of crunching sounds could be heard. The roots of veins of the sky that were close to the flying squirrel's mouth quickly disappeared. When Xueqi pulled back the veins of the sky, the flying squirrel was still struggling. It looked reluctant and stretched its neck out, wanting to continue gnawing. Xueqi didn't give it any more veins of the sky. He quietly observed the flying squirrel's changes. Many animals had a natural instinct and intuition to find herbs. They knew what was good for them and when to eat it. Since it was so eager, veins of the sky must be very useful. Chapter 525. Before the root of vein of the sky was broken, its smell was similar to that of ordinary tree roots. Xueqi did not smell anything special. Even this flying squirrel, when Xueqi extended vein of the sky to it, was very reluctant at first. It only thought that vein of the sky was a threat from Xueqi, a stranger. However, when this flying squirrel bit off one of vein of the sky's thin roots, a light bitter smell wafted out. Xueqi had never tasted it before, so he did not dare to eat it carelessly. Eating carelessly in the forest could lead to death. Even totemic warriors with relatively strong stomachs could not avoid this. Not long ago, someone saw a plant in the forest that looked very similar to the vegetables they grew. After eating a little, he ended up having diarrhea for 2 days. Therefore, Xueqi could only use this flying squirrel as a test subject. After Xueqi took back vein of the sky, this flying squirrel struggled fiercely at first, wanting nothing more than to follow the vein of the sky. But soon, its struggling slowed down. Finally, as if it had fallen asleep, it did not move at all. Only the slight rise and fall of its body proved that it was still alive. However, the wounds on the flying squirrel's body were bloody and deep. The wounds on its back and other parts of its body had stopped bleeding long ago. Not only that, the blood had coagulated and was forming scabs. On its leg, where a piece of flesh had been torn off, it was also changing. If this flying squirrel's injuries were left untreated, it might not survive the night. It had lost too much blood, and there were many bite wounds. It could not even walk. The longer it was delayed, the worse its injuries would worsen. But now, it was recovering. There were still some sparks in the fire. After eating the wild boar, Xueqi did not add any more firewood. Now, in order to see the flying squirrel's changes more clearly, Xueqi held up the water moonstone to light up the fire. Wild beasts approached, their green eyes flashing in the forest. However, Xueqi's aura was very strong. They felt that he was not easy to deal with, so they lingered for a while before leaving unwillingly. Xueqi had been observing the changes on the flying squirrel's body. He did not have time to care about the wild beasts, so he did not hide his aura. He released his aura to intimidate the wild beasts that wanted to approach, saving him a lot of trouble. Xueqi sat on the ground and tied the flying squirrel's rope to a tree branch. He did not sleep for the entire night, so he kept an eye on the flying squirrel. Early in the morning, the flying squirrel who had been tied to the tree moved and woke up from his deep sleep. When he woke up, he probably remembered that he was tied up. Fei Shu's movements became more violent, especially when he saw Xueqi. He screamed in protest. Although Xueqi had given it the vein of the sky and saved its life, it would not let down its guard against Xueqi just because of this. Wild animals were very cautious. If it let go, it would bite Xueqi again. Xueqi looked at the scabs on its body. As the flying squirrel struggled, the scabs fell off, revealing a patch of soft, hairless skin. The most serious injury was its leg. Although it was still sunken, it was much better than the bone-deep injury he saw yesterday. Perhaps it would recover soon. Looking at the strength of its struggle, it was clear that the flying squirrel was very energetic. There was no trace of death in it. After staying up all night, Xueqi did not feel tired at all. Instead, he was very excited. Originally, he wanted to follow the 2 thieves here to find out about the longevity leaf's origin. He did not expect to find something like this. The Ji family did not carry ordinary things with them. The vein of the sky was indeed a very powerful herb. No wonder Ji Ju was willing to give up such a large plot of land to plant it. After feeding the flying squirrel a little of the vein of the sky that he had dug out, Xueqi wrapped the rest in soil and leaves to prevent the smell of the vein of the sky from spreading. An unbitten vein of the sky would not attract the attention of other animals. However, once the smell of the roots leaked out, Xiao Xian could not be sure if it would attract other animals. Looking at the spirited flying squirrel, then at the huge vein of the sky, Xiao Xian's eyes burned with passion. This trip was worth it. Xiao Xian circled around this area and expanded his search. He estimated that there were no less than 50 vein of the sky. This number was naturally not as many as the ones in Jiju's field. However, Xiao Xian was already very satisfied. With these vein of the sky, he might even be able to obtain the seeds of the vein of the sky. Xiao Xian had another guess. After so many years, only 50 vein of the sky survived. Perhaps the main reason was because of the largest vein of the sky. Just like the 1,000-grain gold, in the competition for nutrients, only those who won would survive. Those who lost would become nutrients for other plants. Thousands of years had passed. Countless seeds fell on the ground and countless plants sprouted. However, only a few survived. These were the final winners. Perhaps, if the land continued to become barren, some of them would not be able to survive. However, Xiao Xian had found them. If possible, Xiao Xian hoped to transplant all of these back to the tribe. If they were given enough nutrients and space, would these vein of the sky break free from their slow growth and start a new cycle of growth? These were the legacies left behind by the 3G family members who died here. Thousands of years had passed and no one had been able to obtain their legacies. Not even the longevity leaf was counted. The longevity leaf that recorded the art of knot divination belonged to the E family. However, the legacies that truly belonged to the G family were these vein of the sky that had been quietly growing here. Xiao Xian took a deep breath and calmed himself down. He did not know why the 3G family members would bring the E family's things here. He also did not know what kind of people the 3G family members were. However, Xiao Xian had to thank them for their legacies. Looking around, Xiao Xian walked further away, and then climbed up the hill over there. In this area, only the top of the hill was the highest point. Xiao Xian wanted to take a good look at this area from above. He wanted to see if there was anything else he had overlooked. Looking down from the top of the hill, he had a panoramic view of the area above the cave. Under the domineering vein of the sky, there were not many other plants that could grow well. Even if they could, their growth would be sluggish. Xiao Xian could see all of these plants clearly from his vantage point. His gaze swept across the ground below, away from the area around the cave, and into the distance. There, the grass was denser. In the calm, all sorts of plants fought for nutrients, silently killing each other without anyone noticing. Over there, it was an ordinary mountainous area. There was no strong or weak distribution like the vein of the sky. Xiao Xian decided to stop here and head down the hill to dig up the vein of the sky. Suddenly, he saw a familiar figure. That was. Xiao Xian looked over, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets. Cabbage. Chapter 526. Xiao Xian couldn't believe his eyes when he suddenly saw this familiar figure. He stared at it carefully for a while to make sure he wasn't mistaken. Then, he hurried down the hill and walked in that direction. He hadn't paid much attention to it when he was walking in the forest. He even walked back and forth a few times, but he didn't pay attention to the figure that looked like a cabbage. It was because it was too big. There were all kinds of strange plants in the forest. Xiao Xian didn't know how many plants that looked like leaves he had seen, so he didn't pay much attention to it when he walked past. But standing on the hill and looking down, Xiao Xian couldn't calm down when he saw the figure clearly. The leaves were quite similar, but its appearance was too similar to a cabbage. It was just that this cabbage was taller than Xiao Xian himself. Xiao Xian came to the plant that looked like a cabbage and took a closer look. He could hear the sound of something shattering in his ears. Turning his head to look, Xiao Xian saw a bug as thick as an arm lying on a wide leaf outside the cabbage. It was gnawing a hole in the leaf. Probably sensing Xiao Xian's arrival, the unfamiliar aura gave it a sense of crisis. It stopped gnawing on the leaf and raised the front half of its body to face Xiao Xian. If Xiao Xian hadn't been prepared and knew that this was just a bug gnawing on a leaf, he might have mistaken it for a snake when he saw such a scene. The spots and patterns on the front of the bug looked like a green poisonous snake in the forest. Even the fine lines on the scales were very clear, especially the two lines that looked like eyes. It was very scary. Suddenly, it looked like a snake was staring at him. This was also one of the bug's life-saving methods. However, Xiao Xian had seen many similar bugs, so he wasn't scared by it. He even stood to the side and observed it with interest for a while. Perhaps it felt that Xiao Xian was no longer in danger, so the bug crawled back and continued to gnaw on the leaf. Some bugs in the forest would take years or even longer to transform into butterflies or moths. This bug was probably not far from transforming. Xiao Xian moved his gaze away from the bug and continued to look at the cabbage in front of him. He raised his hand and cut off a piece of the leaf with a dagger. He sniffed it and found it to be okay. There wasn't any strange smell, but Xiao Xian didn't eat it. He might not be able to eat something that the bug could eat. He took the leaf and walked over to the flying squirrel that was hanging on the tree. Unfortunately, the flying squirrel didn't show any interest in the leaf. It only bit when it was irritated, it didn't eat it and spat it out. After a few tries, Xiao Xian watched as the flying squirrel bit the leaf angrily. Nothing happened and Xiao Xian was overjoyed. He stopped tormenting the flying squirrel. He walked around the surrounding forest. Because of the vein of the sky, the other plants didn't grow well near the hole. Xiao Xian didn't see any plants that looked like cabbages, so he had to look further away. Just like the one he had just found, it was found a little further away from the cave. It was quite a strong plant to be able to squeeze out a place to grow in the forest. Xiao Xian hadn't paid attention to it before because he hadn't paid attention to plants that were taller. Now that he followed the leaf, it didn't take long for him to find about 30 of them. And this was only the one in the vicinity. There were even more small plants on the ground that hadn't grown yet. Some of them had obvious traces of being trampled by forest animals, while others had been bitten and had incomplete leaves. There were too many seedlings like this, so Xiao Xian did not count them. If they were left alone, they would not survive. They would either be trampled to death by the animals in the forest, or starved to death by other plants. After looking around, Xiao Xian returned to the hole. Last night, he had been watching the flying squirrel and the effects of the vein of the sky. He hadn't slept at all. Today, he had been running around since early morning. He was a little tired, so he sat down on the grass to rest. He ate the leftover meat from yesterday to relieve his hunger. Xiao Xian thought about the origin of these cabbages. Did they really grow here naturally? There were also people who grew vegetables here. The leaves were about 60% similar to cabbages, but the leaves were much longer and narrower. Moreover, the vegetables that were commonly grown here had fat roots. The people in the tribe mainly ate the roots, and the leaves were just a side dish. The vegetables that were commonly grown in the fields here were large, but most of them were only as tall as Xiao Xian's waist. If they were too small, the people in the tribe wouldn't be willing to grow them. But compared to the cabbages here, they were nothing. Mutated? Xiao Xian suddenly thought of the vegetables that were grown on the other side of the sea. There were also crops similar to cabbages over there. Xiao Xian had seen them in the fields of Jeju. However, although the leaves of the vegetables over there were wide, they grew too scattered and were very short. They only reached Xiao Xian's knees. Many tribes on the other side of the sea didn't grow that. They felt that the yield was too low and it wasn't enough to fill their hunger. But the slave owners liked it. Only the slave masters in King City who liked these vegetables would set aside a large amount of land in their own fields to grow these vegetables in order to eat them. So, on the other side of the sea, only the slave owners had the seeds of these vegetables. The cabbages around here weren't the type that the people here often grew. They were also different from the ones grown in the fields of the slave owners on the other side of the sea. Of course, there were many similarities. But so far, after going to so many places, even the mountains and forests, Xiao Xian had never seen such cabbages. After thinking for a while, Xiao Xian's eyes suddenly widened. He thought of a possibility. This used to be the territory of an unknown small tribe. They also knew how to grow crops. The surrounding terrain was relatively flat, and they might have grown the vegetables that were commonly grown by the tribes on the mainland. So, even if the small tribe migrated, there would more or less be some vegetables left behind. What if the Ji family didn't just plant the seeds of the sky here, but also the seeds of some other vegetables? What if the 3 Ji family members in the cave scattered a handful of vegetable seeds around here before they died? There were 2 similar yet different vegetables growing here. Would they give birth to a descendant that had the strengths of both? Perhaps Xiao Xian was overthinking it. But what if it was true? If it was true, Xiao Xian could only say that it was the will of the heavens. If it was artificially grown, who knew how long it would take to get a satisfactory vegetable? Even the vegetables that were grown in many tribes today had to be filtered generation after generation. Here, different varieties of vegetables from the 2 continents grew together and obtained offspring that fused the characteristics of both sides. Then, after a long period of natural combination and selection, the offspring that survived today, that fused the advantages of both sides, and that had the strongest adaptability and the most stable inheritance, the cabbage. Not only were these Chinese cabbages large in size, they were also in the shape of a ball. Unlike the leaves on the other side of the sea, these Chinese cabbages here, other than the large leaves on the outside, had a tendency to wrap around the core, forming an upright oval ball. Regardless of whether it was the result of crossbreeding or the mutation of the vegetables planted here, Xueqi was very satisfied just by looking at the shape. Now, the only question was, could it be eaten? No matter what, he had to chop one first. Xueqi chose the first one he saw and chopped the big vegetable ball in the middle with his sword. The few leaves on the outside looked too old and were not easy to carry, so he only chopped the ball into an oval shape. The vegetable ball was taller than him and heavier, which made Xueqi even more satisfied. The fact that it was heavier meant that there were more leaves forming the vegetable ball, unlike the other leaves. If it was edible, the yield would be higher. Carrying the vegetable ball on his shoulder, Xueqi went to the cave. He thought of something and turned around to look at the flying squirrel hanging on the tree. There was only a broken straw rope left. It must have run away when he was looking for the Chinese cabbages. To be able to bite the rope, it must have had a lot of strength. It must have used up a lot of energy to struggle. It seemed that the flying squirrel's injuries were almost healed. The veins of the sky around it had no signs of being bitten, which meant that the flying squirrel did not notice the veins of the sky growing here. The veins of the sky that were not cut open were not much different from normal tree roots. It was indeed hard to notice. Robber 11 and Robber 12 had stolen many treasures over the years, but they never thought that there was such a precious thing growing here. Perhaps they had never thought about plants at all. After all, who would just throw a treasure on the ground? After cleaning up the surrounding traces, Xueqi wrapped the veins of the sky and put it in his animal skin bag. He then pulled some big leaves and straw rope to wrap the vegetable ball and left. Xueqi did not plan to do anything here for the time being. He was alone now, so it was impossible for him to take everything away, especially the biggest veins of the sky, which required more careful excavation and protection. He also wanted to try transplanting the veins of the sky back to the tribe, so he needed more help. The other veins of the sky here and the Chinese cabbages were all treasures. Xueqi planned to get people to dig them all up when he returned to the tribe. After everything was settled, Xueqi carried the vegetable ball and left. He chased after the robbers for a whole night and did not return. The tribe's warriors patrolling the border paid attention to any movements in the distance. When they saw Xueqi's figure, the patrolling warriors did not recognize him because he was too far away. Plus, Xueqi was carrying a big vegetable ball, which was very strange. When they got closer and saw that it was Xueqi, the patrolling warriors happily went to welcome him. They did not know what Xueqi was carrying, but since the great elder carried it back personally, it must be something extraordinary. Not only the patrolling warriors, but the others were also curious when they saw Xueqi carrying an unknown object back. It was very big, so it was hard to ignore. Xueqi did not explain much to them. He just carried the vegetable ball and rushed into the forest towards the tribe. His footsteps were hurried, and he disappeared in a flash. Chapter 527. As soon as Xueqi rushed into the tribe, he called for the shamaness, chief and team leaders. Not long after, the two shamanesses rushed into the house. The two chiefs and 3 team leaders also rushed over. According to the messenger, Xueqi came back in a hurry for something. He didn't say why Xueqi wanted to see them, but they heard that it was urgent. If it was just a small matter, Xueqi wouldn't have summoned them in such a hurry. So, they all put down what they were doing and rushed over. They knew that Xueqi went to chase after the bandits, so they were relieved to see him come back safely. But why was he in such a hurry? As soon as they stepped through the door, the first thing they saw was a big bag placed there. "What's this?" asked the shamaness. Xueqi untied the rope and big leaves that wrapped the vegetable ball, revealing the green vegetable ball inside. This house was where the tribe usually held meetings and discussed important matters. The door of the stone house had been widened, so Xueqi didn't feel crowded when he carried the vegetable ball in. On the way, Xueqi also tried his best not to let the vegetable ball hit the branches. So until now, the vegetable ball was still in good condition. "I found something, I think it might be useful," said Xueqi. As he spoke, someone came in. It was Guang Yi. When Xiao Xian returned to the tribe, he saw Guang Yi outside the fearsome beast forest. He was patrolling the newly opened fields, so he asked him to bring 2 birds over. The birds that Guang Yi brought in were the dumb birds that the Lu tribe had just shipped over. Dumb birds were the large birds raised by the Lu tribe. Xiao Xian had seen them before. Because their upper limbs had deteriorated, they couldn't fly. Their bodies were fat, and their legs were thick and fleshy, so they were raised by the Lu tribe as food. Perhaps because they were tamed by the Lu tribe, these birds lost their original wildness. They were much dumber than the beasts in the forest, so they were called dumb birds. Yanjiao had expanded and created many fields and animal pens on Wancher's land. The animal pens were naturally for breeding. They had already bought some baby beasts from the Lu tribe. The first batch of dumb bird chicks had arrived. They were much bigger than adult ducks. After all, their eggs were big, so the birds that hatched would naturally be bigger than other birds. Xiao Xian asked Guang Yi to bring in the chicks and an adult dumb bird. The chicks were small, so they were brought into the stone house. The adult dumb bird was placed on the wooden cart. "Why did you bring dumb birds here?" asked Ao. "Let's see if they're edible." As he spoke, he tore off 2 leaves from the vegetable ball and handed them to the baby dumb bird. The other leaf was placed next to the adult dumb bird's mouth. Although they had already tried it with the flying squirrel, they had to be careful. What if something happened to the people in the tribe who ate it? Xiao Xian had planned to feed the birds if they didn't eat the leaves. Unexpectedly, both the chicks and the adult dumb birds were happily pecking at the leaves. Even though they were tied to the wooden cart, the dumb birds were energized when they saw food. They pecked at the leaves very quickly. In comparison, the chicks were much slower. Seeing Xiao Xian's actions, the people in the house understood what Xiao Xian meant. They looked at the dumb birds who were happily munching on the leaves and their faces lit up. "This is edible?" said Zheng Luo excitedly. Every time they found an edible food, they felt a sense of accomplishment. It was one thing for them to eat ferocious beasts. After so many years they had gained experience in dealing with them. However, plant-based food was their weakness. Being able to eat meant that they could try to grow food. Even if they, the totem warriors, didn't usually eat food, they could feed it to the women and children in the tribe. In addition to meat, they would also eat some fruits and other grains. The seeds they brought back from the other side of the sea hadn't borne fruit yet. Now, they only ate a few kinds of food. If there was one more kind of food that could be widely grown, they would be happy, even if it wasn't enough to satisfy their hunger. They didn't lack food. With the fearsome beast forest behind them, they could hunt. There were also large fields and animal pens outside. They had enough food. They could afford to try planting. Being able to plant new crops was also a proof of their tribe's ability. They would be proud of themselves. Just like this time, when the big tribes came, they learned to be smart. They didn't bring gold, but instead brought their own specialties. Some were more expensive, some were more ordinary. Among the ordinary gifts, there were a few that the Yanjiao people had never seen before. They were all grown within the tribes. In the past, when they lacked food, they didn't care. But now it was different. They felt that a tribe that could grow all kinds of food was more impressive. Duo Kong looked at the big ball of vegetables Xiao Xian brought back and smiled meaningfully. He could use it to show off. When he went to other tribes in the future, he would give them a big ball of vegetables. Yanjiao's specialty? That sounded good. Who said Yanjiao couldn't grow good things? How could a normal person grow such a big ball of vegetables? Everyone in the stone house stared at the vegetable ball with a deep look in their eyes. However, Xiao Xian did not know what they were thinking. He was watching the 2 dumb birds for their reactions. 10 minutes passed. The dumb bird chick pooped in the stone house. It was a little tired, but it was still in good spirits. As for the one outside, it was even more energetic. It was clamoring to eat more. Seeing that there were no problems, Duo Kong rolled up his sleeves. "Why don't I try it first?" "Wait, there's no rush." Xiao Xian stopped Duo Kong from pulling the leaves. "How can there be no rush? If it's really edible, we should quickly dig some back and plant it. What if the other tribes get it first?" Duo Kong still wanted to use it to show off. That's not the most important thing. As he spoke, Xiao Xian took out the vein of the sky wrapped in leaves from the animal skin bag. When he wrapped it, he put soil inside. After removing the soil, he carefully brushed it clean with a brush. Xiao Xian held up the vein of the sky, which was missing a small part of its roots, for everyone to see. "This, it feels Gigu couldn't explain it. He just felt that it was familiar. Ta looked at the vein of the sky's roots and felt a chill. I think I've seen it before, but I've never seen it before. Ta's words were contradictory, but everyone knew that when he said he had seen it before, he meant that he felt it was familiar. But they had never seen this plant before. Xiao understood everyone's feelings. Although many people in the tribe would observe the body structure of their prey after hunting so that they could give it a fatal blow the next time they hunted, they had never done this for humans. They knew the general distribution of the meridians because when they used their totemic power, they would have a hazy feeling. Following the direction of their totemic power, they could see the meridians in their body. That was why Xueqi, Ta, and the others had said that he looked familiar. It looks similar to the meridians in our body. Because it grows like this, it's also called the vein of the sky. Xiao said. Vein of the sky? Zhang Luo and the old shaman shouted at the same time. When they were on the other side of the sea, they had heard about the vein of the sky, but they had never seen it before. It was said that only the people in the royal city had it. It had been many years since they last heard about the veins of the sky from the Taiha tribe. Vein of the sky? The rumored vein of the sky that can reconnect broken meridians. The old shaman's voice trembled with excitement. Duo Kong and Zhang Luo's faces were red with excitement. That's what the vein of the sky looks like? Xiao, where did you find it? In the room, 8 pairs of eyes stared at Xiao. Xiao briefly told them about his discovery of the vein of the sky and the cabbage. When they heard Xiao say there might be a 1,000-year-old vein of the sky there, even the usually calm shaman and chief breathed heavily. Dig it up. The 2 shamans shouted at the same time. The leaders were also rubbing their fists and palms. They couldn't wait to tear down that piece of land and carry it all back. As for the cabbage, Xiao said, dig it up too. Dig it up, dig it up, dig it all up. Even an idiot knew the value of the vein of the sky. Yanjiao would never give it up. The Chinese cabbage Xiao was talking about had an unknown origin. Regardless of whether the Ji family was involved, it could be eaten, it could grow big, it might even grow fast. Most importantly, it was easy to survive. What were the Yanjiao farmers afraid of? It wasn't a bad harvest. No matter how bad it was, there was still something to be gained. Their large-scale planting had just started not too long ago. Everything was still in the trial and error stage. It was impossible for them to compete with other tribes who were good at planting. There had to be a process of practice. If they could succeed, perhaps it would be a big breakthrough for the Flaming Horn tribe. It would also give everyone enough confidence. In the ancestral records, the glorious Flaming Horn tribe was not only strong in terms of fighting, but also in terms of farming, breeding, and handicrafts. The current Flaming Horn tribe had just woken up from a deep slumber. If they wanted to regain their former status, they still needed to work hard from all sides. The cabbage was a piece of juicy meat to them. They wouldn't give it up either. They discussed in the house for a while, then looked at the 2 dumb birds. The young one was looking around curiously while the one outside was dozing off out of boredom. It was not poisonous and could be eaten. This solidified everyone's resolve. There wasn't much time for them to do more experiments. They were worried that someone else would find out about the land. They wanted to do more experiments and move everything back first. Thus, not long after Xiao rushed back, he left with a large group of people. One of them was the chief, 2 of the leaders, and many of the smaller leaders. The tribe didn't want to keep it a secret either. Perhaps other tribes would secretly follow them. But the land belonged to Yanjiao. Who would want to steal it? They didn't say much, just do it. Chapter 528. This time, Zhang Luo, Duo Kong and Gigu went out with Xiao. Generally speaking, the people on the other side of the sea had more experience in planting and digging. After all, their former neighbors were the Taiha tribe who were good at planting. The 2 shamans felt more at ease leaving it to them. As for why Gigu could continue to follow them instead of Ta, that was because of his white falcon. When Cha-Cha was absent, he could only rely on it for aerial warning. Although Yanjiao knew they couldn't hide it from everyone this time, it was necessary to take precautions. Ta was very depressed about this. When his brothers from the other side of the sea came, it wasn't his turn to go out. This time, it wasn't his turn either. Hence, the people from the other tribes who were chatting with each other in Yanjiao saw Ta's long face when they went out. Xiao Xian led the people to the cave where they found the vein of the sky. They looked around carefully. No one else had been here and there were no signs of gnawing on the plants. They sighed in relief. It's here. Xiao Xian pointed out the vein of the sky to the others. Seeing the living vein of the sky, everyone was very excited. Thinking about how it would all belong to their tribe, they were even more excited. Is that the cabbage Xiao Xian mentioned? Zheng Luo looked at a cabbage in the forest. Xiao Xian had only brought back a ball of cabbage, but here was a whole one. If Xiao Xian hadn't pointed it out, Zheng Luo wouldn't have guessed it. Yes, that's it. I only cut the ball in the middle. Seeing such a big cabbage, Zheng Luo nodded in satisfaction. Without further delay, he divided the teams. Who was responsible for guarding? Who was responsible for digging the cabbage and who was responsible for digging the vein of the sky? Knowing that this place was full of treasures, the group of rough flaming horn tribesmen were particularly cautious. They took small steps forward. Before they came, the shamans and chiefs had already told them what to do. Because they knew how precious these things were, they were very careful. They were overly careful, afraid that they would accidentally step on a plant and kill it. They had to be gentle when dealing with these precious plants, unlike how they usually hunted. It was difficult for Yanjiao people to say the word gentle. Considering that some people were not good at recognizing plants, and the vein of the sky was a plant that was highly valued by the tribe, Xiao Xian circled each vein of the sky so that it would be easier for others to dig. When Zheng Luo gave the order to dig, the soldiers who usually swung stone sticks thicker than a man to smash the beasts now held palm-sized shovels and carefully dug. After digging for a while, he turned his head and asked Xiao Xian, "First Elder, is this the right way for me to dig?" He dug again and asked Zheng Luo, "Chief, should we continue digging?" Dig. Hurry up. Stop dilly-dallying. When are you going to finish digging like this?" Zheng Luo couldn't stand it anymore. He took out a small shovel and crouched down to dig at a small vein of the sky in front of him. His movements were bold and forceful. However, the moment the shovel touched the ground, it was as if he had stepped on the brakes. He only dug a fingernail deep. Xiao Xian couldn't stand watching these people who didn't even sweat when killing fearsome beasts start sweating after digging a few shovels. This was the first time these people were doing something like this. They were under too much psychological pressure and were very nervous. After this, it might be better if they encountered similar situations in the future. Xiao Xian was in charge of the biggest vein of the sky. Zheng Luo came over after digging a few shovels. As the chief, Zheng Luo had to participate personally. However, no matter if it was Zheng Luo, Duo Kong and the rest, even Gui He, who had always been calm, were all nervous when they started digging. When Xiao Xian's shovel went down, they all trembled. They were worried that Xiao Xian would damage the vein of the sky, but they also knew that it wasn't a good idea to be so nervous. In the end, they could only follow Xiao Xian and dig. Their goal was to bring the tree back and transplant it. They just had to ensure that the roots were intact. There was no need to dig up all the soil, so Xiao Xian and the others basically started digging from the outer parts. After removing the soil, Xiao Xian continued digging along the roots of the vein of the sky. Sometimes he used a shovel, sometimes he used a brush. In order to bring the vein of the sky back, they dug like they were treating an antique. In fact, although the roots of the vein of the sky looked thin, they were still very resilient and were not that fragile. Especially this vein of the sky that seemed to have been growing for thousands of years. Its roots were harder than the other small veins of the sky. When Duo Kong was digging, he accidentally shoveled too hard. When he looked over nervously, he realized that there was only a shallow shovel mark on the vein of the sky's roots. The skin was not broken. As long as they were careful, it wouldn't be a big deal. There was no need to be too nervous. This calmed them down a little. Later on, they were no longer restrained and dug more efficiently. The white falcon in the sky screeched from time to time. It was just a warning. If anyone ignored the warning and barged in, the Yanjiao people would have to take action. Caesar was brought out by Xiao Xian and defended with the other warriors in the forest. A wolf's nose was more sensitive than a human's and could detect places that the warriors overlooked. When the sun was about to set, the largest vein of the sky had been dug out. Its roots were too long, and the area it covered was much larger than the parts on the ground. It looked like it was made up of the meridians of a 10-meter-tall giant. After digging it out, Xiao Xian wrapped a large piece of linen cloth in the soil and wrapped the roots of the vein of the sky. They couldn't stay here for too long. They were carrying treasures and they couldn't hide their movements from others. If they stayed here for a night, who knew what would happen? The safest thing was to return to the tribe as soon as possible. Are you done with the rest? Asked Xiao. Almost. We've dug out all the veins of the sky we can see, no matter the size. We still haven't dug out the small cabbages you mentioned, said Zheng Luo. Forget about that. Wrap up the ones we dug out and bring them back. We'll dig up the rest later. You guys tidy up first. I'm going down into the cave. Xiao lifted the stone slab at the entrance of the cave with a jar and jumped in. Inside the cave, the 3 skeletons were still lying there in their original positions. Perhaps they had been in this position for nearly 1,000 years. Xiao had already prepared a small clay pot and placed it beside the 3 skeletons. There were some grains in the pot. According to the tribe's rules, whoever found it kept it. Whoever stole it kept it. That was why it wasn't a big deal to dig up everything here. Xiao didn't think much of it. Moreover, most of the Ji family in Royal City still had a grudge against Yanjiao. The people of Royal City had hunted them down on the other side of the sea. Although he didn't know the identities of these 3 people or what had happened in the past, Xiao still decided to come. It had nothing to do with the Ji family in Royal City or anything else. When Xiao was with Ji once said that if Xiao encountered a similar situation one day, he hoped that he could place a jar of grains beside the people who couldn't go home. He didn't ask for much, just a jar of grains. Compared to the other Ji family members in Royal City, Ji treated Yanjiao well and helped Xiao a lot. The seeds and planting techniques in Yanjiao were all taught by Ji. Xiao was willing to do what Ji said. Coming out of the hole and looking at the sky, Xiao, Zheng Luo and the others carried the things they dug up and headed back to the tribe. They wanted to get back before the sky turned completely dark. It was already late and many things couldn't be seen clearly. The people who secretly followed the Yanjiao team in the distance could only see the Yanjiao warriors carrying things. Some people went to the hole after Yanjiao left but couldn't see anything on the ground. There were traces of digging everywhere but they couldn't see anything important. Before the Yanjiao team left, they turned the place over again to erase the important traces. These people could only guess that the Yanjiao people had dug up something here but couldn't know what it was. In fact, the Yanjiao people didn't keep everything a secret. There were rumors about the cabbage, so some people in the tribe knew that Xiao had found a new kind of food outside and brought people to dig for it. As for the veins of the sky, even the people in the tribe didn't know about it. The next day, the people from the other tribes in Yanjiao stayed up all night with doubts. When they woke up in the morning, they heard that Yanjiao had made a big move and hurried over to take a look. A part of the newly reclaimed land had been blocked off with a tall wooden fence, leaving no gaps. There were also many soldiers standing guard outside, preventing others from approaching. The Tian Shan people couldn't help but be curious. They wanted to ride their eagles up to take a look but were forced back down by the patrolling team's arrows. The patrolling team's attitude was firm. You have to listen to me in my territory. You can't be so impudent. You're pissed? If you're pissed, you can leave. What are you still doing here? Friendly exchange? What kind of friendly exchange is this? The next time they see you, they won't just force you down. They'll shoot you down. It was rare for the Tian Shan tribesmen to not start a fight. They were too curious. What did the flaming horns bring? Why are they guarding it so tightly? The others also advised them to be patient. They had to figure out Yanjiao's situation first. However, when they finally figured out what the flaming horns were growing, their interest was gone. A new kind of food? Among these tribes, which one of them had less food? Only the Tian Shan and Hui tribes on the grasslands didn't plant much, so they weren't interested. A new type of food was indeed not very attractive to these tribes. Why were they guarding it so tightly for such a small thing? Yanjiao was so stingy. Ignorant. At the same time, in the forest, the veins of the sky had been planted in the tribe's fields. After a few days of adaptation, the veins of the sky in the ground began to show signs of life. Especially the small veins of the sky. Before, they were suppressed and their growth was slow. Now that the land was bigger, there were fewer competitors for nutrients. They were ready for a new round of growth. Looking at the veins of the sky in the ground, the 2 shamans smiled. The cabbages outside attracted most of the people's attention. These veins of the sky were very low-key. We have to send more people here. Definitely. We can't relax on the cabbage fields outside. Got it. As the shamans and chief spoke, Xiao suddenly looked in a direction. "What's wrong, Xiao?" asked Zhang Luo. "There's been a lot of thieves lately." Chapter 529. Hearing Xiao's words, everyone's expression changed. "Someone else is here?" Ao asked. "Yeah." Xiao nodded. "But he ran away again." After some thought, Xiao said, "It doesn't seem to be the same person from last time." Xiao was referring to the aura he sensed in the Wanderer area not long ago. The aura he sensed now was similar to the one he sensed before, but it was different. Even the two leaders, Zhang Luo and Ao, couldn't sense it, but they didn't doubt Xiao's judgment. "Last time you asked the patrol team to bring him back, I did it myself. I think there's more than one person hiding in the dark," Ao said. Last time, when Xiao chased after Robber 11 and Robber 12, the patrol team followed them. After that, Xiao captured Robber 11 and restricted Robber 12's movements. The patrol team returned first. However, he also asked the patrol team to pass a message to Zhang Luo and Ao. After Xiao released Robber 11 and Robber 12, he smeared something on their bodies. When the Yanjiao hunting team hunted, they would look for special prey. For example, they needed a part of the prey's body to be used as medicine, or they needed a horn that was suitable for polishing weapons. If the prey was good at escaping, the Yanjiao people would sprinkle some tracking powder on the prey when they first encountered them. Most of the powder had a strong smell, just like the powder they threw at the ambushers when they were ambushed on the other side of the sea. Even if the ambushers were to hide, the flaming horns would still be able to detect them once they came into contact with the powder. Among the tracking powder, there was a very faint smell. Most people couldn't smell it, but some beasts could. The powder Xiao sprinkled on Robber 11 and Robber 12 was the latter kind. The smell was faint and hard to detect, but Caesar and the rest could smell it. It wouldn't completely dissipate in a short period of time. After the patrol team returned, they passed on Xiao's message to Zhang Luo and Ao. They used a few beasts in the tribe with a keen sense of smell to wander around the tribe every day, closely inspecting the few areas where they could detect the smell. When Xiao captured Robber 11, he learned that Robber 7 was hiding nearby. He knew that the higher the ranking, the harder it was to detect them. So he used Robber 11 and Robber 12 as a medium. The people they came into close contact with, especially those who fought with them, would definitely be tainted by the smell. According to the results, Ao's findings. After Robber 11 and 12 were released, they sneaked in again, but they were only on the outskirts, they didn't infiltrate the tribe. Although Ao didn't manage to catch them, he was sure that other than Robber 11 and Robber 12, there were other people who knew the two robbers lurking nearby. Among those people, there were some who were stronger than Robber 11 and Robber 12. They were the ones Xiao mentioned before, the ones who ranked higher in the robbers. It's not just Robber 11 and Robber 12. There's also Robber 7. There should be other robbers too, but they might not be united. Zhang Luo felt troubled. Anyone who was targeted by people who were good at hiding in the dark wouldn't feel good, especially when those people were famous robbers. Actually, what I'm confused about is, how did the robbers get here so quickly? Even if it's because of the result of our battle with Wanshi, there shouldn't be so many of them at once. Xiao expressed his thoughts. News didn't travel fast here. The 7 tribes were able to get here quickly because they had people keeping an eye on them. What about the robbers? They were scattered all over the place and didn't keep an eye on Yanjiao from the start. But now, there were so many of them at once, and they were all top robbers too. It was hard to catch them. What did Yanjiao have that attracted them? Even if they destroyed Wanshi, it shouldn't attract so many experts. The purpose of the robbers was different from others. Their purpose was to steal, not to test their strength. In the eyes of most of the people on the mainland, the Flaming Horn tribe was still a relatively backward tribe that only had brute force. The shaman agreed. Indeed, I've heard that robbers love to steal valuable treasures. Could it be that they've taken a fancy to something in our tribe? Could it be the fire seed? Or the core seed? The old shaman thought for a moment. They couldn't come to a conclusion, but they had to be careful of the robbers. They didn't have to worry about the fire seed anymore, but they had to keep an eye on the core seed. Xiao carefully recalled the details of when he chased after Robber 11 and Robber 12. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that those two might not have been after the longevity leaf. Perhaps, the longevity leaf was just there. Otherwise, 2 years would have been more than enough time for them to sneak into Yanjiao. Why wait until now? Or let Robber 7 take a look. Speaking of which, if the one who sneaked into the Wanderers area was really Robber 7, then Robber 7's appearance was much earlier than the other tribes. Perhaps, before the battle with Wanshi, there were already people here. Something must have happened that we don't know about, Xiaoxian said in a low voice. A straw rope fell from his hand. He didn't know what happened through the knot divination, but he had a feeling that the people who came this time might not be because of Wanshi. Do you think those tribesmen who have been loitering outside are hiding something from us? Xiaoxian asked. That's not impossible. It's not the first time those tribes have been hiding things from us. Ao's tone was filled with strong dissatisfaction. Those people even said they wanted to have friendly exchanges and cooperate. Cooperate my ass. Ao weighed the axe in his hand. He had the urge to go out and chop those people up. He just didn't like them. If it wasn't for the fact that he knew it wasn't good to mess with them, he would have done it already. As they were talking, someone came to Xiaoxian and told him that someone from the Hui tribe came to see him. It wasn't the two chiefs or the shaman, it was Xiaoxian. Do you know who it is? Xiaoxian asked the warrior who came to report. Gu La from the Hui tribe. Just him alone? Yes. The shaman gestured to Xiaoxian. Let's go and see what he wants to say. Okay. Xiaoxian asked someone to take Gu La to his room. Yanjiao's fire seed was no longer there. Even near the fire pit, there was no pressure from the fire seed. So when Gu La was taken there, he didn't feel the suppression from Yanjiao's fire seed. Gu La hesitated. He knew that Yanjiao's fire seed might have changed, but he couldn't figure out why. However, the fire seed was a secret of the tribe. If the Yanjiao people didn't want to talk about it, he couldn't get anything out of them. Continuing to ask would only make him more disgusted. This time, he came to find Xiaoxian for something else. In Xiaoxian's room, Old Ku was in another room making stoneware. Caesar was guarding the door, so they weren't afraid of being eavesdropped. What's the matter? Xiaoxian handed Gu La a cup of tea brewed with herb leaves. Gu La drank a little absent-mindedly. The bitter taste made him frown, but he didn't care. After a sip, he put down the cup, thought for a while, and said to Xiaoxian, "Did you find any suspicious people around?" "You mean the two people I chased a few days ago?" Xiaoxian looked up at Gu La. Although Gu La looked calm, there was hesitation in his eyes. His fingers on his legs were tapping, as if he was thinking about a decision. After a pause, Gu La's eyes finally settled, and his tone became more serious. "No, it's not just them. There may be more." Xiaoxian's heart jumped. There really was an inside story. "What do you mean?" Gu La didn't answer directly. Instead he said, "You know, our tribes have been focusing on the desert for the past 2 years. If there's any movement in the desert, we'll know very quickly." Speaking of this, Gu La smiled awkwardly. "But we haven't been aware of Yanjiao's movements." Gu La was talking about the Yanjiao tribe suddenly bringing so many people out of the desert. They didn't find the reason, and this was something they had been wondering about. Looking at Xiaoxian, Gu La saw that Xiaoxian didn't seem to want to explain. He coughed and continued, "Actually, after you brought so many people out of the desert, another group of people left not long after. They were people from Rock Hill City. When we first found out, we thought that the overlord of the desert, Rock Hill City, sent people out of the desert to eliminate the slave masters who escaped from the desert, because they were moving in this direction. But until now, I haven't seen anyone from Rock Hill City nearby." Xiaoxian said. "Of course you haven't seen them, because they entered from the other side of the fearsome beast forest. They didn't enter from your side," Gu La pointed out. The fearsome beast forest was huge, and Yanjiao's side was only a small area at the border of the forest. It was possible that someone entered the forest from another place and Yanjiao didn't know. After all, from the time they brought people back to the old haunt until now, Yanjiao had only gone on one hunting expedition, and during this time, they only hunted for food nearby. If they didn't go deep into the forest, they naturally wouldn't know about other movements. "You mean, Rock Hill City's goal is the fearsome beast forest?" Xiaoxian asked. "Not for the slave masters who escaped, not for Wanshi, and not for Yanjiao, but just to enter the forest? It seems like they're looking for something, but we don't know exactly what they're looking for. When you brought back the new species of food, some people guessed that you might have discovered the secret." Gu La smiled bitterly. In the end, they were disappointed. Yanjiao had only found a new type of food. Xiao lowered his eyes in deep thought. What could make the Sure family of Rock Hill City send people all the way into the fearsome beast forest? Gu La's words revealed a lot of information, but most importantly, those people's goal might not be Yanjiao, but something in the fearsome beast forest. At the same time, Gu La also sent a message that they wanted to cooperate with Yanjiao. Compared to the other tribes, they favored Yanjiao. After saying what he wanted to say, Gu La stayed for a while and left. Xiao also told the shaman-in-chief about what Gu La said, so that they could prepare in advance. Chapter 530. It was almost the end of the year. Under normal circumstances, it was already autumn and the temperature should have dropped. However, the fearsome beast forest was still active. There was no sign of autumn. In fact, the weather was even hotter. This time last year it was the same. The old shaman sat on a rock and looked at the forest in the distance. He sighed. No, this year is hotter than last year. The unusual changes in the weather made people uneasy. Fortunately, they were much calmer this year because of last year's experience. Plus, the two divisions of the Yanjiao tribe had reunited this year. It could calm people down and boost their morale. If there were any problems, they could solve it together. After experiencing the unusually cold winter on the other side of the sea, Zhang Luo and the others felt uncomfortable. But it was better to be warm than to be frozen, right? The warm weather also had its disadvantages. The animals in the forest, which should have started to wilt, were all unusually active. These flying insects were only one of them. When hunters entered the forest to hunt, they could clearly feel that these ferocious beasts had no intention of staying through the winter. They were quite energetic. Poisonous snakes and insects were also a problem. What's going on over there? The old shaman walked over with a taut face. She looked at a group of people rushing out of the forest not far away. Kiki, what's going on over there? The old shaman stopped Kiki, who was running away. Hearing the shaman call him, Kiki rushed over to explain. Shaman, I heard there are a lot of insects eating the cabbages in the fields outside. The chief is so angry that he wants us to help. A lot of insects? The two shamans were shocked. The first thing they thought of was the veins of the sky planted in the forest. They hurried to the fields to check, afraid that there would be insects there. The good thing was that there was not a single flying insect in the area where the veins of the sky were planted. Even underground, there were very few insects. These veins of the sky seemed to be naturally resistant to insects. Of course, this was only limited to the unbroken veins of the sky. Seeing this, the two shamans calmed down. They waved Kiki to go outside to help kill the insects. There were many things planted in the fields. Some had not sprouted, some had just sprouted. The ones that suffered the most were the cabbages. If it was in the past, those bugs wouldn't be so active. Worry appeared in the shaman's eyes. Excluding last year's situation, at this time of the year, under normal circumstances, many of the insects in the forest would be preparing for winter and would not fly around in groups. Ever since the people of Yanjiao came here, they had never encountered such an insect disaster. Perhaps it was because of the weather, but these insects that had no intention of staying through the winter all came out to move around, as if they were welcoming another spring. In addition, Yanjiao's expansion of farmland outside the forest attracted a lot of flying insects. Previously, they had only seen a small wave of flying insects occasionally. The people guarding the fields could still handle it, but now that there were so many of them, they could not handle it. They could only rely on the help of more soldiers. When Xiao arrived, the farm was in chaos. Swords, sabers, sticks, hammers, and so on were all huddled together noisily. Those flying insects were more than 20 centimeters long. Xiao swatted one down with his sword and pinched it to take a look. It was a light green flying insect with a slight tinge of yellow. It had 2 large compound eyes, a slightly wide chest, a slender abdomen, and 2 pairs of almost transparent wings with crisscrossing net-like patterns. It had 5 pairs of slender legs with sharp claws. The front pair of legs were used for catching. When it landed on a leaf, these slender claws could firmly hold onto the leaf, preventing it from falling. These flying insects also had chewing mouthparts, so they could chew leaves very quickly. It was these flying insects that made the soldiers in the tribe so anxious that they wanted to fly into flames. They could handle large ferocious beasts, but when faced with so many small flying insects, they could not handle them all at once. Moreover, when these flying insects flew high, it became harder for them to kill them. Using arrows? That was not suitable either. These flying insects could not fly too high. But after all, the soldiers could not fly. Even if they could jump a little higher, it would be difficult for them to kill the insects. Sometimes, when there were too many insects, there would be too many people. When killing the insects, some people would jump into the air and crash into them. Not only did they not kill the insects, but they also made their own people dizzy. Someone thought of pulling a net, but the area of the farmland was too big. It was impossible to cover all the land in one go. Moreover, unless the seams of the net were made smaller, it would be useless against these flying insects. They could squeeze through the seams of the net. It was not easy to get rid of this wave of insects, and the busy people finally took a break. Someone went to weave a net. We can cover another batch today, but it's not a good idea to keep doing this. Mai looked at the gnawed leaves and said angrily. Xueqi also thought about it. Farming had to let the crops see Yangguang. A net that was too dense could block some flying insects, but it would also block Yangguang. It was not a safe method. Spraying pesticides. Not to mention that they had not developed it yet. Even if they did, no one could guarantee that the descendants of the dead insects would be healthy. The conditions were limited, and there was no way to study the ratio more precisely. It's up to us. Xueqi, who was sitting at the side and panting, was sweating profusely. He had never felt that killing insects was so tiring. They had to kill the flying insects and pay attention not to step on the things planted in the ground. It was really difficult. Some people used a thick wooden board to hit the insects, but the effect was limited. You can make some small holes on the board, and then cut the bottom of the board to make a handle. That way, it's easier to hold, Xueqi said. The eyes of the warrior holding the board lit up. He felt that this method was feasible, and then he took out his tools and started to cut the board. Some people were cleaning up the mess, picking up the dead insects on the ground and putting them together. Because the stupid birds they raised did not eat these insects, and the other animals they raised were mostly vegetarians, they made the dead insects into fertilizer to fertilize the land. This also made the people in the tribe feel relieved. Little bug, come on. In the end, didn't you become fertilizer for the land? Xueqi looked around and walked back into the forest. He wanted to go to the casting room. It was night time. Because the cabbage in the field was no longer a secret, the surrounding area was not too tightly guarded. After experiencing the insect disaster during the day, the warriors guarding the farmland were a little tired. A figure sneaked in with the night, like a thin leaf blown by the wind. It lightly flipped over the wooden fence around the cabbage field and landed on the ground with a slight sound. After the black shadow landed on the ground, it listened carefully to make sure that it did not attract the attention of the people guarding the farmland. Then, it floated up again and landed on a cabbage like a butterfly. It left as soon as it touched the cabbage. There was only a short, cheap sound, which sounded like an inconspicuous insect. Still, no one paid attention to it. Hiding in the shadow of a cabbage taller than a person, the man took a cut leaf to his nose and sniffed it. This small leaf was cut from a cabbage ball near the middle. He had heard from the people in Yanjiao that the leaves near the middle of the cabbage ball were crisper and tasted better. He had been watching for a few days, and wanted to come and try the newly discovered vegetables in Yanjiao. Today he finally had the chance. He was a vegetarian and did not like meat. He put the small leaf in his mouth and tasted it. After chewing it carefully, he felt that it was quite good. It was crispy and fresh. After hiding for so long, he finally got something he was satisfied with. The 2 moons in the sky cast moonlight that was not very bright. From time to time, there were clouds blocking the light. The guards who glanced inside did not notice that under a cabbage leaf taller than a person, there was a person hiding in the shadow that was darker than the night. After eating the leaf, the man looked around. When he jumped up, he quickly glanced around. Even though it was very dark, he could still see his surroundings clearly. He remembered that there was a bigger cabbage not far away, much bigger than the other cabbages around it. When he jumped up, he saw it from the corner of his eye. He decided to start with the biggest cabbage. He wondered how the people in Yanjiao would react when they found out that the biggest cabbage in the field was missing a cabbage ball in the middle. Thinking about it, he was looking forward to it. Chapter 531. His original goal wasn't Yanjiao. He only knew that there was a tribe in this remote forest. But after he came here, He heard that Yan Jiao destroyed the Wansha tribe and forced the slave masters who escaped from the desert to leave. His interest was piqued. He didn't have to worry about the final goal for now. He wouldn't be able to find it in a short period of time anyway. He would let the others explore the path while he stayed in Yanjiao for a few days. What he didn't expect was that the Flaming Horn tribe was even more difficult to deal with than the legends said. He was discovered several times, but he was fast and had sharp instincts. Every time, he could escape before the other party caught up with him. This was the main reason why he dared to continue staying in the Flaming Horn tribe. As long as he could escape, it didn't matter if he was discovered or not. Yan Jiao couldn't catch him anyway. However, the Flaming Horn tribe's territory in the forest was too heavily guarded. He had been guarding it for so long, but he still couldn't sneak in. Especially the last time, he wandered around the Wanderer's area for so long. He almost took a step forward but was discovered by someone. Thinking about Robber 11 and Robber 12 who were caught once, he sneered. They weren't even in the top 10. How could they compare to him? Did Yan Jiao really think that just because they caught 1 or 2 robbers, they could catch all the robbers? How naive. He planned to cut down the biggest cabbage in Yan Jiao's territory to teach Yan Jiao a lesson. The more he thought about it, the more satisfied he was. Yan Jiao must have placed a lot of importance on this piece of land. If the cabbage was stolen, they would definitely send more people over. Then, when Yan Jiao had their eyes on the cabbage field, he would find a chance to sneak into the forest. I'm so smart. At night, a black shadow moved silently under the tall cabbage. It was more agile than a snake in the dark. Still, no guards discovered this place. Looking at the biggest cabbage that was getting closer and closer, he raised his eyebrows slightly, bent his knees, and flew up like a piece of grass blown up by the breeze. The thin black knife in his hand was like a beast that had found its prey. It finally flicked its sharp claws and pointed directly at the vegetable ball in the middle of the cabbage. But just as he was about to attack Cabbage Ball, his scalp went numb, and he felt an intense sense of danger. It was as if a pair of eyes had appeared in the darkness of the night. No, not just one pair, but 2. 2 people had discovered him. A spear suddenly attacked, forcefully breaking through the air with a sizzling sound, as if a poisonous snake that had been waiting in the dock had finally bared its fangs. The spear came very quickly and suddenly, giving no time for people to prepare. Moreover, the black shadow just happened to jump into the air. Logically speaking, people who jumped into the air would have their movements severely restricted. However, before the spear could reach it, the black shadow that leaped up was like a thin leaf that was suddenly pushed by another air current. It suddenly flipped over, almost sticking close to the spear, and then retreated safely without any injuries. Ao did not expect this person to be able to strangely change direction and turn in the air without any external help. The sudden attack just now was dodged by the opponent. Ever since he knew that the thief was difficult to deal with, Ao had thought of many ways. In the end, he decided to stay in one place and hide all his breath. Before discovering the target, he would not use any of his totemic power. Even his breathing and heartbeat were as weak as possible, making him appear no different from the others. He also did not put all his attention on the person who had sneaked into the cabbage field. Xueqi had told him that the opponent had extremely sharp observation skills. Unless he deliberately did not pay attention to the opponent, he would be able to escape as soon as he saw him. So, Ao only took action when Xueqi gave the signal. Before that, Ao would pretend that he did not see the thief. Still want to run. The corners of Ao's eyes were raised high. He flipped into the cabbage field, took a big step, and leaped out, waving the stone axe in his hand. In an instant, a majestic aura rose up like an angry wave, pressing forward, as if to drown the person in front. The domineering aura spread out, enveloping the entire cabbage field. As the head of a division, Ao's strength was unquestionable. If it were other warriors under the pressure of Ao's surging aura, even if they did not make a mistake, their movements would be slowed down. But the black shadow that retreated was not the same. Strangely, the aura of the fire seed that was completely different from Yanjiao suddenly soared, like a strong wind that suddenly blew in a moonless night, as if everything around was blocked, making people feel hazy and confused. That black shadow was like a sharp cold air that rose from the darkness, stirring in the dark night, dispersing the pressure that Ao brought. All of this happened in an instant. In just one exchange, the opponent not only dodged the attack, but also turned the tables on him in terms of aura. In order to hide better and hide from the vigilant thief, Ao did not discuss with the guards around the cabbage field. But after hearing the commotion, The guards around the cabbage field were alarmed and wanted to stop the figure that was about to escape. Warriors with all kinds of weapons jumped up and stood on the surrounding wooden fences, like building a long human wall, blocking the escape route of the thief. There were still people coming from outside. Ao was very confident. There was no escape. That thief would not be able to escape. The clouds in the sky drifted, and one of the two moons that were hidden was revealed. In the face of Yan Jiao's tight defense and the pursuit of the people led by Ao, the thief did not panic. He still had a piece of cabbage leaf in his mouth, and there was no trace of nervousness in his eyes. His pupils were like a stubborn stone lying in the dark night, and a cunning light flashed in his eyes. Whoosh! It was like the whistling of an arrow that was shot into the air. Whoosh! 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 A series of sounds rang out, as if someone had suddenly shot out millions of arrows. However, this was only the sound emitted from that person's body. His totemic power suddenly erupted and rose to the peak in an instant. Under the urging of the fire seed's power, the air that spurted out from the inner layer of his skin was like a sudden miniature hurricane that rushed out of his pores. The person who landed on the ground squatted slightly, then suddenly shot up like a rocket that had its fuse ignited. Following the whistling sound, he flew out at an extremely fast speed and instantly distanced himself from Aola, who was chasing behind him. The other party didn't flee in any other direction. He ran straight for the wooden fence at the edge of the vegetable field. The path he took was the shortest way to leave the vegetable field, and the row of Yanjiao soldiers in front of him didn't seem to be a threat to him. Not taking a detour, but directly crashing into it. Seeing the figure rushing straight at them, the Yanjiao soldiers were shocked, but they still gripped the weapons in their hands tightly and prepared to block him. However, they heard an even more rapid whistling sound, like someone had whistled. The black figure that had rushed to the wooden fence suddenly turned in the air and rose up, then rushed out of the vegetable field again, breaking through the encirclement that had been painstakingly formed. The other party's sudden rise was completely out of the Yanjiao soldiers' expectations. It was too late for them to jump up and stop him, so they could only watch as the other party flew past them. With their leader leading the way and so many people, they couldn't stop a thief who ran into the vegetable field to steal vegetables. Aola looked at the figure that was getting farther and farther away, and his heart was filled with depression. He had heard Xiao Xian say that robbers were difficult to catch, and now he was experiencing it firsthand. Strange movements, erratic movements, and unexpected techniques. Was this what a robber was like? Under the moonlight, the person who had run out of the vegetable field smiled wider and wider. You want to catch me? You think I'm trash like Robber 11 and Robber 12, who couldn't even squeeze into the top 10? So what if you've been plotting an ambush? So what if you've discovered me? In the end, all you can do is watch me run away. Haha. Yan Jiao, that's all there is to it. Just as he thought this, his eyelids twitched, as if a cold current was flowing through his hair and into his brain. He was so shocked that all the hair on his body stood on end. Who else? A whistling sound came from beside his ear, like a huge palm slapping him across the air, so fast that he couldn't change his direction. His pupils suddenly dilated as he tried to see what it was that was sweeping towards him. What was that? A net? No, it wasn't a net. No matter what it was, run. However, the net-like thing followed the black figure closely, and with the sound of air friction, it whipped the black figure in the air. Clang! The loud sound carried a lingering tremor. It exploded in the dark night and spread to everyone's ears, spreading to even further places. Everyone who heard this sound wondered if the person who was whipped by that thing would have his bones separated from his body and fall apart like the trembling aftershock. The black figure was sent flying by the huge net, and the whooshing sound from his body came to an abrupt stop, like a chicken that was suddenly strangled by the neck. Drawing an arc in the air, the black shadow finally fell to the ground, rolled a few times, and stopped moving. Ao, who had jumped out of the vegetable field, looked at the motionless figure on the ground in the distance, and motioned for the others to quickly tie up the person, regardless of whether he was dead or alive. After giving the order, Ao looked at Xiao Xian, who was standing there. Xiao Xian stood there calmly, holding a strange-shaped thing in his hand. The lower end of the thing was like the handle of a large spear, and the upper end, just by looking at it, looked like a square net about the length of two people. However, if one looked closely, they would find that the net was fixed, not soft like a net made of straw. It was hard and connected to a long handle. Ao was surprised when he saw Xiao Xian go to the casting room and make this thing today. Seeing Ao and the others staring at him, Xiao Xian held the long handle and turned it, and the hard net in the eyes of the tribesman above also turned. I'm here to hit flying insects. I didn't expect the first one to be a flying thief. Xiao laughed. Chapter 532. Many people heard the commotion at the Yanjiao's cabbage field, but they didn't know what happened. They only heard the next day that the patrol team caught a vegetable thief. Are all thieves stealing vegetables these days? The wanderers couldn't understand. They thought that if they wanted to steal, they should steal the grains instead of the cabbage field, which was heavily guarded. Grains were better than anything that could fill their stomachs. What a strange thief. The few figures hiding among the wanderers were hesitant. They tried to find someone to investigate. Unfortunately, it was late at night. Usually, after dark, other than the patrolling warriors, everyone else would be resting in their houses. Even if they heard the commotion, they wouldn't go out to see if the patrol team didn't inform them. With their weak bodies, the slightest mistake could cost them their lives. Being too curious would kill them. Therefore, after the few figures asked around, they could only return with a stomach full of doubts. In a place where the patrol team and wanderers weren't paying attention, the few scattered figures gathered again. Who do you think was the one who was caught last night? A slightly low voice asked. Judging from the commotion last night, could it be Robber 7? From what I know, he seemed to have been interested in that vegetable field for a long time. Another hoarse voice said, as if his throat had been severely injured. It gave off a very uncomfortable feeling. Robber 7? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. If Xiao was here, he would definitely recognize the owner of this voice. The one who spoke was Robber 11, who was caught by Xiao before. Robber 7's escaping ability is the best among us. Even if he was discovered, he could still escape from Yanjiao's pursuit. It shouldn't be him, Robber 12 agreed. The first person who asked the question was silent for a while. He straightened up and looked around. But Robber 7 hasn't appeared yet. Although he doesn't like to move with us, he wouldn't refuse our invitation. Even if he didn't want to show up, he would have done something instead of doing nothing. Hearing this, the others fell silent. They really didn't believe and didn't want to believe that the person who was caught was Robber 7. If it was really Robber 7, what could the others do? It was dangerous. After another half an hour, Robber 7 was still nowhere to be seen. It should be him. The hoarse voice spoke slowly, like a blade scraping against a rock, giving people goosebumps. The expressions on their faces kept changing as they each had their own thoughts. We can't stay in Yanjiao any longer. Let's leave this place and go into the forest to look for something, the first person said in a low voice with a cautious tone. As for saving Robber 7, none of them had the intention to do so at the moment. Comradeship? What a joke. Thieves always looked out for each other. How could there be something like camaraderie? It was his own fault for being caught. He was unlucky and deserved it. Wouldn't it be better to do something proper instead of stealing vegetables when you're so bored? If Robber 7 died, the other robbers behind him would be more than happy to take his place. Robber 11 was the happiest among them. As long as one of the robbers in front of him died, he would be able to take a step forward. Ha ha, thinking about it this way, it was a good thing. The other two didn't care about Robber 7, let alone Robber 11 and Robber 12. They were able to escape from Yanjiao last time because Xiao asked them to do something. He had promised them and kept his promise. However, if they were caught again, it would be hard for them to escape. Without any hesitation, they split up and left Yanjiao's territory. They entered Fearsome Beast Forest from a place outside Yanjiao's territory. At the same time, in Yanjiao's territory, in a stone house, the person who was tied up in a shape finally moved. When Robber 7 woke up, he felt his bones creaking. Every movement was painful as if they were crushed. There was a bloody taste in his mouth and his face was swollen. His head was still dizzy, and when he opened his eyes, his vision was blurry. He couldn't see his surroundings clearly. Other than the bloody taste in his mouth, there was a bitter taste of herbs. He knew what it was and guessed that the Yanjiao people didn't want him to die just like that. They wanted to get more value from him, so they fed him some medicine so that he wouldn't be injured to the point where he couldn't speak. Robber 7 quickly analyzed the situation he was in and began to think about how he could escape safely. He knew that the other robbers wouldn't come to his rescue so easily. He could only rely on himself if he wanted to live. What should he offer in exchange for Yanjiao? What could he say to fool the Yanjiao people? He had miscalculated. He was too confident and didn't expect Yan Jiao to use such a strange thing to knock him down. Moreover, the person who used the strange thing was very fast. He didn't even have time to change his position and was almost sent flying. Hiss! Every movement of his face hurt. Half of his body was directly hit, including this half of his face. He was fast, but his body couldn't compare to the Yanjiao people. As the saying goes, the body is as light as a swallow, but if you take a heavy blow, you'll feel better. Wasn't it just stealing vegetables? How could he end up like this? Robber 7 sighed for himself. He scanned the stone house. There were a few auras in the house. Robber 7 couldn't see them clearly, but he could recognize 2 of them. As someone who often stole in the dark, he could accurately identify people's auras, even if it was just for a moment. Among the people in the stone house, one was the one who threw the spear at him last night. The other was the one who suddenly appeared at the end of his coma. "You're awake." Robber 7 heard an unfamiliar voice, breaking the silence in the stone house. Zhang Luo walked to the person who didn't seem to be fully awake. He looked at the half-swollen face of the robber. His original appearance was blurred. "You're Robber 7?" asked Zhang Luo. Robber 7 was stunned. He didn't expect Zhang Luo to reveal his identity so quickly. He thought about it carefully. The only people who could reveal his identity were his own people. Among the people who infiltrated Yanjiao, only Robber 11 and Robber 12 were caught. Robber 7 made a mental note of those 2. His mind raced as he tried to figure out how to deal with the upcoming predicament. He heard that Yanjiao people were very barbaric. Would they eat human flesh? Would they cook him? Maybe they'd even put a few cabbage leaves in the pot. Wait, now wasn't the time to think about cabbage. My robber number is indeed 7. Robber 7 didn't deny it. In fact, most of the time, they were happy for others to know their robber number, which was the code name of a robber. However, what they enjoyed was the helpless look on people's faces when they mentioned their name after a successful theft. They didn't want to be beaten half to death before they even succeeded. Robber 7's gaze shifted from Zhang Luo in front of him to the people behind him, finally stopping at Xiao Xian. So this was the guy who knocked him out? Robber 7 made a mental note of this. "What is your motive for infiltrating Yanjiao?" Zhang Luo asked. "My motive?" Robber 7 wanted to say to steal vegetables, but he knew these people might not believe him. It wouldn't help him escape. Robber 7 rolled his eyes and said, "My motive is the same as those tribesmen who are still here." Zhang Luo and Ao quickly glanced at Xiao Xian. This was similar to the information they received from the Hui tribe. Zhang Luo waved the knife in his hand and pressed the blade against Robber 7's neck. He asked, "What are you looking for?" The coldness of the blade made Robber 7 tremble, but he quickly calmed down and said, "Don't do anything rash. If you push me too far, I won't say anything. Don't even think about getting an answer from those tribesmen. They don't know either." "What are the people from Rock Hill City looking for?" Xiao Xian suddenly asked. Robber 7 looked at Xiao Xian in surprise. Originally, he wanted to whet the appetite of the Yanjiao people. The higher the Yanjiao people's appetite, the easier it would be for him to negotiate. He didn't expect to be asked so directly. Although he was puzzled as to why Xiao Xian could say Rock Hill City directly, it was understandable when he thought about the tribesmen who were still here. This kid must have heard it from them, right? All of their actions were because of a single sentence from the people of Rock Hill City. "If I tell you, will you let me go?" Robber 7 asked. Zhang Luo frowned. Why did they all like to negotiate now? But he still nodded. "Sure. You agreed too quickly. I don't believe you." Robber 7 shifted his gaze to Xiao Xian. He felt this kid was unreliable. He continued to look at the 2 older shamans. His eyes darted back and forth between them. "Sure." The old shaman nodded. "Shaman." Ao disagreed. He felt these thieves should be crushed to death instead of letting them go. After they left, they would come back for a second time. The shaman raised his hand to stop Ao. He then looked at the old woman who was still sitting calmly. "What do you think?" "Sure." The old woman said the same. Although they knew that letting this robber go meant he might come back again, compared to what they wanted to know, the 2 shamans felt this deal was worth it. They also wanted to know what Rock Hill City was up to. Did they extend their reach to Fearsome Beast Forest after taking over the desert? Robber 7's eyes lit up when he heard the word shaman. If it was someone else, they might go back on their word. But if the shaman agreed, the possibility of going back on their word was quite small. Robber 7 saw the opportunity and cleared his throat. The people from Rock Hill City are looking for something. And that thing is most likely to be in Fearsome Beast Forest. What is it? Zhengluo asked. Green-faced fanged beast. Chapter 533. Even the two shamans couldn't stay calm when they heard the name. Let alone Zheng Luo, who was standing in front of Robber 7. That was why when Robber 7 said the name, Zheng Luo couldn't hide the shock and excitement in his eyes. At the same time, the people who spoke were no better than Zheng Luo and the rest. Robber 7 wanted to see the Yanjiao people's confused expressions. Not what? So it's them. Obviously, they already knew about it. Didn't they say that other than the people of Rock Hill City, no one else knew about it? Even the arrogant slave masters in the desert, other than the Shi family in Rock Hill City, no one else knew about it, let alone the tribesmen outside the desert. How did the Yanjiao people know about it? Robber 7 was bewildered. Xueqi didn't expect Robber 7 to give such an answer. If they didn't believe that Yanjiao people who knew about the green-faced fanged beast wouldn't leak information, they would have suspected that there was a spy. Xueqi found out about the green-faced fanged beast from Gongjiaheng. Then, how did the Shi family in Rock Hill City know about it? If they knew, why didn't they send people to search for it? The Shi family never looked for the green-faced fanged beast before, asked Xueqi. Robber 7 recovered from his shock. He thought about it and decided not to hide it. He couldn't put himself in an advantageous position. The Yanjiao people knew more than he expected. Now, he could only use more information in exchange for Yanjiao's promise. Actually, the Shi family in Rock Hill City had sent people to search for it a long time ago, but they couldn't find it. Rock Hill City used to be the city that sent the most slaves out of all the desert cities. But because there were other people in the desert, Rock Hill City didn't want to make a big deal out of it, said Robber 7. Xueqi remembered a long time ago, where he first met Xueqi. There was a slave stronghold there, and Rock Hill City definitely had more than one stronghold outside the desert. He used to think that they were just recruiting slaves and expanding their army. Now that he thought about it, they might be looking for the green-faced fanged beasts. Before Yanjiao came to the Fearsome Beast Mountain Forest, other people rarely came. Naturally, they didn't notice anyone entering the forest. When Yanjiao came back, it happened to be a few years before Rock Tomb City planned to unify the desert. They didn't have time to care about the Fearsome Beast Mountain Forest, so they didn't see anyone entering the mountain. Besides, the Ferocious Beast Mountain Forest was huge. Even if the Yanjiao hunted, it was impossible for them to travel through the entire Ferocious Beast Mountain Forest. It was possible that no one else had entered the forest. Now that the situation in the desert had been settled, the other side once again began to act without any scruples. However, Xueqi felt that Rock Hill City's operation this time was a little too rushed. Green-faced fanged beast, what does it look like? Zheng Luo and Ao's breathing quickened. Ever since they found out that the green-faced fanged beast's blood could be used to forge good weapons, they had been thinking about it. Unfortunately, they couldn't find it. If they could get more detailed information about the green-faced fanged beast, it would be easier for them to find it. Robber 7 didn't show it on his face, but he was already thinking about it. So the Yanjiao people didn't know what the green-faced fanged beast looked like. Instead of looking for it himself, why not tell the Yanjiao people and let the Yanjiao people go through the trouble? Then when they found it, he could steal it himself. Robber 7 thought to himself. It was said that once the scar was healed, one would forget the pain. This person was still tied up and he was already thinking about how to steal the next time. I've seen a drawing and memorized it, but my hands are tied up. How can I draw it for you? Robber 7 lifted his chin and pointed at the straw rope that tied him up. This kind of rope was too strong. The more he struggled, the tighter it became. It was a terrible feeling to be unable to move. Zheng Luo looked at the two shamans. Seeing that they nodded, he went over and untied the vines around Robber 7's arms. Xueqi took out a leaf that was half the width of his arm and handed it over with the beast ink brush and paint. He had already prepared this beforehand. He originally planned to pry something useful out of Robber 7's mouth. He didn't expect Robber 7 to have no intention of hiding anything, and even brought such a surprise. Robber 7 loosened his grip and asked Zheng Luo to untie the vines around his legs. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to draw well in this uncomfortable position. After some thought, Zhang Luo tied Robber Seven's legs. This time, he didn't tie them up in the shape of the Chinese character, or fasten them to a wooden stake. Instead, he made him sit on the ground. Draw properly. Ao's patience with this bandit was running out. He felt that Robber Seven was too cunning and couldn't be trusted. If it wasn't for the shaman's promise not to kill him, he would have chopped him down with his axe. Robber Seven ignored Ao's murderous aura. He knew that the two elders in the house were of high status, but he didn't understand why there were two shamans in Yanjiao. No matter what, since the two shamans in Yanjiao promised to let him go, as long as the information he provided was worth it, the two elders would definitely keep their promise. Hence, he wasn't in a hurry. Robber Seven twisted his wrist and frowned. When he moved his arm, he could still hear the bones in his body creaking. The beating he received last night was too heavy. One of his arms was fractured and he couldn't draw, so he could only use the other. Enduring the pain, Robber Seven picked up the brush and dipped it in paint. He recalled the painting that he had seen before and started to paint it one stroke at a time in a serious manner. For the sake of his own escape and for Yan Jiao to find the item as soon as possible, he didn't intend to play any tricks. He was still waiting for Yan Jiao to find the item so that he could steal it and trade it with the Sher family in the desert for something better. However, as Robber Seven drew, he stared at the two leaders with wide eyes. Their expressions were getting worse and worse. "All right, I'm done." Robber Seven looked at the result of his drawing and nodded in satisfaction. Just as he was about to continue negotiating, he raised his head and saw the two people standing beside him with dark faces. Whoosh! The two leaders attacked almost simultaneously. One held a knife and the other an axe. They came at Robber Seven from each side. "Wait!" Robber Seven quickly shouted. He was injured and couldn't dodge easily. He didn't understand why the two had such a reaction. He was anxious. The tip of the knife and the axe were on both sides of Robber Seven's neck. In the next moment, his head would be separated from his body. No matter how calm a robber was, under such a murderous attack, he couldn't stay calm. "You Yan Jiao broke your promise. How can you go back on your words? How can you face your totems? We didn't keep our promise? Why don't you take a look at what you've drawn? How dare you fool us?" Ao held his breath. His nostrils flared and his hot breath came out like an angry bull. "When did I fool you?" Robber Seven was furious. He had drawn exactly the same. "The drawing I saw was exactly like this. I swear on my name as a thief." Robber Seven straightened his neck, his face full of dissatisfaction. "How dare you accuse me of drawing so well? You don't know how to appreciate it. Yanjiao people are really vulgar. They're just like those small tribesmen living in the border areas." Both sides were red in the face and neck as they confronted each other. The shaman, who was sitting on the side, coughed awkwardly and signaled Ao and Zhang Luo to put down their knives and axes. She then looked at the drawing that Xiao handed over. Ao wanted to say something, but the shaman gave him a look. Ao didn't understand at first, but after calming down and thinking about it, he understood. He couldn't help but blink a few times. Xiao knew Ao quite well. Ao would only blink uncontrollably when he felt guilty. Xiao also knew what the shaman meant. In fact, Xiao believed Robber Seven when he said that the drawing made up of a few simple lines was the result of absolute seriousness. He didn't intend to fool them at all. Because most of the people here were good at drawing, let alone a drawing that was passed down from 1,000 years ago. There was only one possibility for the people of Rock Hill City to know about the green-faced fanged beast. Someone from the group that came 1,000 years ago knew about it. Therefore, the person who drew the green-faced fanged beast must be someone from 1,000 years ago. Based on this, Robber Seven's words could be trusted. Ao and Zheng Luo understood. If this was a few years ago, they would have drawn the same thing, but not as good as Robber Seven's drawing. However, because of Xiao's drawings, their drawing skills improved a lot, and other drawings weren't good enough for them. Now that they suddenly saw such a simple drawing, they just couldn't accept it. They were too excited just now and were disappointed when they saw Robber Seven's drawing. After calming down, they looked at Robber Seven's drawing seriously. Something that looked like a deer but wasn't a deer, a sheep but wasn't a sheep. Was this the green-faced fanged beast? Ao glanced at the drawing in disgust and said to Robber Seven, "Tell me more about the situation. Who can understand a drawing like this?" On Robber Seven's swollen face, his eyes that were originally squinted into slits widened due to his anger. "Looking down on my drawing. However, he had no choice but to lower his head. Robber 7 was still hoping that the other party would fulfill his promise and let him go. He could only take a deep breath, suppress his anger, and tell them what he knew. In fact, Xueqi and the others had already heard what Robber 7 said. Green-faced fanged beast, small in size, green in color, thick skin, hooves without horns, sharp fangs growing upwards, fierce in nature, and fond of eating grass. Anything more than that would be gone. That's all. Ao looked at Robber 7. That's all. Robber 7 saw that Ao's murderous aura was rising again, and knew that he wasn't satisfied with what he said. He quickly added, "The person who told us really only said this. However, there was one more thing. He told us that if we really met the green-faced fanged beast, we would know for sure." "The person who showed you the drawing was from the Sure family of Rock Hill City?" Xueqi asked. No. It was obvious that Robber 7 didn't want to answer this question. This was the secret of the robbers. Even the most cowardly robbers had their own principles. Some things could be sold out, but some things could never be revealed. "How much did the people of Rock Hill City give you?" Xueqi asked again. "If we find the green-faced fanged beast, we can bring it to them in exchange for anything we want." This was something that could still be said. "It seems that you robbers have always been in contact with Rock Hill City. Otherwise, you wouldn't have mobilized so many people at once," Xueqi said. Robber 7 pretended to be dead and didn't say anything else. After some questioning, Yan Jiao and the others reluctantly believed Robber 7's words and kept their promise to let him go. They blindfolded him and threw him out of the forest. They thought that he was severely injured and couldn't walk. However, after landing on the ground, he escaped with the speed of a bird and disappeared from their sight. "I told you he was faking it," Ao said angrily. "Xian." "What?" "The next time you see him, beat him to death." "All right." Chapter 534. Ao, Zhang Luo and the others couldn't wait any longer after knowing that Rock Hill City's goal was to find the green-faced fanged beast. In their opinion, the green-faced fanged beast was equivalent to a higher-level weapon. With a higher-level weapon, the tribe's combat power would greatly increase. Who wouldn't want to find it? Since the Sure family of Rock Hill City had sent people to Fearsome Beast Forest to search, did it mean that there really was a green-faced fanged beast in Fearsome Beast Forest? Not necessarily. However, if there was a place on this continent where the green-faced fanged beast could be found, it would be Fearsome Beast Forest. There were no other places that were suitable for the beasts to live in. Searching for the green-faced fanged beast was definitely not an easy task. Otherwise, the Sure family of Rock Hill City wouldn't have sent so many people into Fearsome Beast Forest. They even hired robbers, who were good at excavating treasures. Is there really a green-faced fanged beast in Fearsome Beast Forest? After so many years, the people of Rock Hill City still haven't found it, right? Tower said. Not necessarily. Even if they did find it, as long as they don't say anything, no one would know. If there really isn't one, Rock Hill City has existed for almost 1,000 years. Why would they keep an eye on Fearsome Beast Forest? Generations of rulers of Rock Hill City had sent people to search for it. This meant that they had never given up on the forest. If there really wasn't one, why would they be so persistent? Rock Hill City hid too well. If it wasn't for the chaos in the past 2 years, no one would know that Rock Hill City had been brewing a huge conspiracy. No one knew the true strength of Rock Hill City. Perhaps they had even more trump cards up their sleeves that no one knew about. That's true. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go find it. I'll be the first to join. Duo Kong couldn't wait. No rush. Xueqi looked in the direction of the tribes outside the forest. Those people haven't been dealt with yet. Since the Hui tribe expressed their intention to cooperate, Yan Jiao was naturally willing. No matter how arrogant they were, they didn't think that they could challenge the other tribes at the same time. It was a good thing to form an alliance. Go tell Gula to prepare to enter the forest. Xueqi said. What if the other tribes want to go with us? Gigu asked. Then let them show their sincerity. Among the people from the Hui tribe who came to Yanjiao, there were actually 2 factions. One faction supported abandoning the other tribes and joining forces with Yanjiao, while the other faction believed that Yanjiao was not worth cooperating with. They only had strength and might be a little scheming, but they were far inferior to the other tribes. However, in the end, they still decided to choose Yanjiao. First of all, Although they said that they were cooperating with several other tribes, their relationship was not that good. Usually, they did not have close contact with each other. Most of the time, they still needed to inquire about information on their own, so they did not get many benefits. Secondly, they could no longer tolerate those people's overly cautious and hesitant style of doing things. In recent years, the people of the Hui tribe only felt that something big might happen. The shaman of the Hui tribe also predicted that there might be a huge change in the near future. He wasn't sure when, but he was sure it wouldn't be far away. This made the Hui tribe, who lived a peaceful life on the grasslands, unable to remain calm. Something that could affect them was definitely not to be underestimated. Unfortunately, up until now the progress was really disappointing. They could not wait any longer. On this day, several people of the Hui tribe were arguing about cooperation with Yan Jiao. Since Gu La went to find Xueqi, many days had passed, but Yan Jiao still did not give them a satisfactory answer. Some people started to get anxious. Didn't they see that the other tribes were laughing at them? They didn't even want to go out, afraid that once they went out, they would see a circle of mocking faces. Just as they were complaining, Gigu came over. "Pack up, we're going into the mountains." Into the mountains. Gu La's eyes lit up. When Gigu said go into the mountains, it was definitely not to hunt, but to look for something. "Do you already know what you're looking for?" She, who was at the side, asked with uncertainty. Gigu did not answer directly, but gave him a meaningful smile. Almost as soon as Gigu left, the people of the other tribes rushed to the Hui tribe's place to ask. When they found out that the Hui tribe was going into the mountains with the Yanjiao people, they could not sit still and went to find the leaders of Yanjiao. They did not believe that the Yanjiao people would know what Rock Hill City was looking for. They only wanted to go with them because they wanted Yanjiao to lead the way. After living outside the mountains for a long time, they would definitely feel uncomfortable after entering the forest. Fearsome Beast Forest would not give them enough time to adapt. If they went in rashly, they would easily lose their lives. As for Yanjiao's sincerity, they also understood that Yanjiao wanted a guide fee. This was easy to negotiate. Thus, the three leaders took the promises of those people and went to find Xueqi. A large boat from the Longboat tribe, half a cart of jade from the Mang tribe, half a cart of silk cloth from the Eight Limbs tribe, a strong bow from the Tianshan tribe. After listening to the three team leaders, Xueqi raised his eyebrows. Let them double the original amount. Ha! Not just the three leaders, even the two leaders who had been listening felt that Xueqi's demands were too high. Those people might not agree, said Zheng Luo. Disagree? If they don't agree, then scram. Give them 2 days to come up with an answer. Otherwise, let them leave on their own, said Xueqi calmly. After some thought, Ao nodded. Let's do that. Those people had been here for so long. Did they really think that Yanjiao would tolerate them forever? They thought that Yanjiao cared about them. 2 days later, the three leaders came back with the results of their discussion. The other tribes have all agreed. Only the Tianshan tribe refused. They've already left. Looks like they plan to enter the mountains themselves. Duo Kong felt refreshed when he thought about the other tribes' dark faces. Did they really think that Yanjiao was free? They were just a little late in collecting the fees. Oh, by the way, the people of the Hui tribe said that they would send a batch of good horses from the grassland after this incident. Xueqi smiled and said, the people of the Hui tribe are very sincere. The other tribes had already sent people back to prepare things. Other than those who planned to enter the mountains with Yanjiao, they would also leave a few people behind to deliver the promised sincerity. When do we leave? The shaman asked Xueqi. 2 days later. The weather is getting weirder, said Xueqi as he looked at a flowering tree not far away. The berries of that tree were used to make paint, so when the tribe built houses, they didn't remove them. They had other uses. However, this kind of tree usually only blossoms when it is close to summer. It only bears fruit when the summer is hot. According to normal calculations, it should be almost winter now. But now, in this winter, the weather might be closer to summer. The mountains might be more dangerous than before. The ferocious beasts that had their lives disrupted might be more irritable, so they had to be extra careful. Entering the mountains at this time, they might encounter some dangers that they wouldn't have encountered in the past. They were only going to explore the mountains, but they weren't going to hunt, so they didn't need to bring a lot of people. This time, Xueqi planned to only bring 5 people, but with the addition of the other tribes, it would be a lot more. In the fields outside the forest in the cabbage field, new leaves were growing, and many small cabbages that had been transplanted had also begun to grow spherical leaves. The leaves wrapped around each other. Maybe it was because the land here was large and there was enough fertilizer, but the cabbages changed almost every day and grew very fast. Because of the weather, combined with last year's situation, crops that shouldn't have been planted in winter were now being planted. Xueqi's giant fly swatter was also used by the people patrolling the fields. Because metal was too rare, they only made one. The others used similar swatters, but they weren't made of metal. They were made of wood, but the Yanjiao people were too strong, so it was too easy to break them. So every time they encountered a swarm of insects, the people guarding the fields would rush to use the metal swatter. When the swatter swatted the flying insects, it would swat a bunch of them down. It was very satisfying. In the tribe, life was still the same as before, but many times, people felt like they had just transitioned from spring to summer. Every time they moved, they would sweat profusely. Xueqi brought the medicine and other things that he had prepared. This time, the other 4 people who were going into the mountains with him were Duo Kong, Tua, Mai, and Xiang Chen. They were only going to see if there were any green-faced fanged beasts. Maybe they would look for traces of the slaves who entered the mountains to see if they could get more information from them. Compared to the calmness of the Yanjiao people, the people from the other tribes already felt uncomfortable before they even entered the depths of the mountains. The mountains were filled with all kinds of noises and screams. Even the wind that blew carried a sense of danger. Unforeseen danger was even more frightening. However, in order to understand what Rock Hill City, the ruler of the desert, valued, they still had to go in. It wasn't just the Hui tribe. In fact, the other tribes also had a premonition that there might be a huge change in the near future. However, they couldn't predict what it was. They could only try their best to understand all kinds of doubts and find more protection. This was also why they were willing to take out more things in exchange for their companions. Between giving up and getting something, they still had a sense of balance. The scorching sun hung high in the sky. In the mountains, tall trees gathered together. There were no yellow leaves. Even the trees seemed to have lost their original rules of growth. They were lush and thriving, without a sense of desolation. All kinds of flying insects flew between the leaves. There were also pairs of eyes hidden behind the leaves, either vigilant or bloodthirsty. Xueqi and the other 7 Mang tribesmen followed Huang Yi, following the footsteps of the Yanjiao people in front of them. The presence of the surrounding people was too strong. It was difficult for him to ignore them. However, the Yanjiao people said that he didn't need to pay attention to them. As long as he ignored them, they wouldn't take the initiative to attack. However, the Yanjiao people had long been used to this kind of thing, but the others were not. Xueqi couldn't help but look up at a tree that was 10 times thicker than him. There was a figure on the branch. He couldn't see what it was because it was too similar to the color of the bark. If it wasn't for his keen eyesight, Xueqi wouldn't have noticed it. It looked over with undisguised murderous eyes. It bared its fangs, as if it was going to pounce on them in the next moment. Xueqi shuddered and quickly looked away. He didn't look at the eyes on the tree. It seemed that the murderous look in his eyes faded a little. Sure enough, the Yanjiao people were very experienced in dealing with these things. No wonder the elders of the tribe agreed to let the Yanjiao people lead the way instead of going into the mountains themselves. It really saved them a lot of unnecessary trouble. Chapter 535. It was said that a long time ago, most of the tribes lived in the mountains and forests. Later on, some tribes walked out of the mountains and forests in search of a more peaceful place to live. Some tribes, although not migrating, cut down the forests around their living areas. After thousands of years, they were separated from the original mountains and forests, and the former forests could not be seen in their original state. Among the tribes that decided to go into the mountains with the Yanjiao, some had ancestors who left the mountains themselves, such as the Longboat tribe. Others, such as the Feather tribe, had deliberately changed their surroundings. No matter which it was, they hadn't felt it in a long time. Moving in a place like this, isolated from the rest of the world, full of ancient trees, wild grass, fearsome beasts and poisonous insects, was like returning to the most primitive state of savagery. They were wearing clothes made of finely woven linen and silk cloth, which made them feel particularly out of place as they walked. For the people of the various tribes who had always wanted to leave their barbaric state, this was indeed a very special experience. Looking at the 5 Yanjiao people in front of them, they still looked normal. Although they wore clothes made of cloth, most of them were made of animal skin. Normally, they didn't feel anything special, but after entering the mountains, they could clearly feel the changes in the Yanjiao people. They seemed to have blended into the forest, and there was no sense of awkwardness. It was as if these people were born to belong in the mountains. Rather than saying that they were hunters who were good at surviving in the mountains, it was more accurate to say that they were humanoid beasts that roamed freely. Yes, the people of the various tribes were beginning to feel the beastly nature of the Yanjiao people. Especially after seeing Duo Kong tear apart a beast that had pounced down from a tree with his bare hands, the bloody visual impact was even more intense. It was the most primitive, savage nature. This was the real Yanjiao people. Whoosh! A spear pierced through the small gap between the few people in the group, almost brushing past their clothes. The wind made the cloth flap. The spear's high speed seemed to heat up the air, and it made the fine hairs on the people's faces tremble. Poochie! Thud! The sound of a sharp weapon piercing through flesh and the sound of a nail piercing into a tree sounded at almost the same time. The people who thought they were going to be pierced by the spear stiffened and slowly twisted their bodies to look in the direction of the sound. There, a strange-looking animal was waving its bamboo-like limbs, twisting its body as if trying to break free. However, a spear pierced through its neck, nailing it to the tree trunk. Brownish-red blood flowed out of the wound. The grayish-brown animal that looked like a dried leopard gradually slowed down its struggling movements until it stopped moving. Looking at the animal's claws, they were like nails. Many people in the group swallowed their saliva. How did it move when it looked like this? Just now, he didn't even hear much of a commotion. By the time he heard the sound and prepared to defend himself, the spear had already arrived. What is that? Someone from the feather, it's a normal beast in the mountains. Xueqi walked over and pulled out the spear that was nailed to the tree trunk. Don't get scratched by them. They are poisonous. We usually don't eat them. No one asked if they could eat it. Seeing Xueqi's incomparably calm reaction, many people in the group were already complaining in their hearts. They already lost their appetite when they saw the beast, let alone eat it. In fact, many people in the group had been to the desert. It was reasonable to say that there were many desert beasts. They had experienced the desert and should have been mentally prepared. But the mountains were different from the desert. Killing people was different from killing beasts. In the desert where the slave owners lived, there were too many dead places. Sometimes there were no living creatures. As long as they were a little cautious, they could avoid most of the dangers. But it was different here. There was life everywhere, full of vitality and full of killing intent. It was impossible to guard against. If they had to deal with every kind, they would die of exhaustion. This was the world of fierce beasts. Screech! A few eagle cries came from the sky. The faces of several people from the Hui tribe suddenly changed. They could feel the anxiety from the eagle's cries and wanted to climb up the tree to see what was going on. The foliage here was lush, almost covering the sky above. Only some fine yongguang shone through the narrow gaps between the leaves. No need to look. Your eagles must have gone the wrong way and entered the territory of other fierce beasts. Xueqi guessed without looking. Tell them not to fly around and follow the original route. Be honest and don't fight with those fierce beasts. It won't be good if they attract more birds. Xueqi explained. Gula quickly nodded and climbed up the tree. He whistled to the sky and waited for the giant mountain eagles to fly down. He gave them a few words of advice before returning to the group. In the mountains, there are many places you have to pay attention to. Some areas are surrounded by fierce beasts. Don't wander around. You have to see if you can deal with those beasts. If you enter the territory of a fierce beast that you can't beat and kill its prey, then you're out of luck. Xueqi led the way while explaining to these people who had never lived in this mountain. If they could learn more about it, they could avoid trouble. But, how do we know where the fierce beasts are and where we can't mess with them? Someone in the group asked. Don't you have us? Xueqi said, we haven't really entered the heart of the ferocious beast mountain forest yet. We Yanjiao know more about this place. As long as you follow our instructions, you can avoid some unnecessary trouble. So, they had to go wherever the Yanjiao told them to go? The people who heard Xueqi's words were unhappy, but they could only follow the instructions of the Yanjiao people in the ferocious beast mountain forest. After all, they had no experience surviving in the ferocious beast mountain forest. I just hope you can lead the way. Huang Yi of the Mang tribe said. That's for sure. Don't worry. As soon as Xiao Xian's voice fell, they heard cracking sounds not far away. It was the sound of branches and vines breaking, and it was getting closer and closer. A huge beast's head suddenly rose from the ground, emerging from under the crisscrossing vines and branches. The lines on the surface of its body were like cracks on the bark of an ancient tree. Its two huge nostrils were big enough for people to crawl in directly. The low growls of the beast sounded like muffled thunder. Such a huge vicious beast was so close to them, yet it was hidden so well. They didn't feel its breath at all just now. The people in the group glared at Xiao Xian. This guy just told them not to worry. What was this? Not to worry, my ass. They almost peed their pants, okay? As if he knew what the people in the group were going to say, Xiao Xian lifted his chin and pointed at the fierce beast. Don't just look. Do it. It's tonight's dinner. The others. Without waiting for the others' reactions, the 5 Yanjiao people had already picked up their weapons and rushed over. Roar. The giant beast let out a roar of provocation. On the other side, Xiao Xian's group of 5 exploded with their peak totemic power at almost the same time. Their vast auras directly pressed against the fierce beast not far away. Neither man nor beast backed down. The tyrannical auras collided in this cramped place. On the tangled vines, leaves flew out of the vines as if they were suddenly torn off by someone. The dense foliage of the shrubs swayed violently, making rustling sounds like a rainstorm. Under the impact of the two auras, those who were close to them could feel the creaking of their bones. It was as if they were a lonely boat under the waves. Once they were in a hunting mode, the Yanjiao people couldn't be distracted. This was what they were best at and loved. When facing people, they had to consider too many things. Many times, it wasn't as if you were stronger than your opponent that you would have a good ending. The human heart was complicated and difficult to understand. This was something the Yanjiao people only understood after coming into contact with other tribes. It was because of this understanding that many Yanjiao people preferred to hunt in the mountains and forests. In times of crisis, it made people's blood boil, and it was a carefree exercise. Perhaps some of the smarter and more cunning beasts would occasionally do something surprising, but that was rare. Most of the time, the beasts relied on their own advantages to start a battle for survival. As a hunter, as long as they were stronger than you, that was enough. It was a simple law of the jungle. The roars of the beasts, the sounds of sharp and blunt weapons hitting each other, and the whirling waves of air, all of the animals hiding in the surroundings were frightened and fled in all directions. The people from the other tribes stood to the side, watching the 5 Yanjiao people use the most direct and barbaric method to hunt. The Yanjiao people were really fierce. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.